time is now 6 p.m. I'm going to call the city council meeting into order. Today is September 28th, 2021. Can we have a roll call, please?
Council Agency Authority Member Stockton.
Here.
Ritchie.
Here.
Silva.
Here.
Roberts.
Here.
Wiley.
Here.
Vice Mayor, Vice Chair Sullivan.
Here.
Mayor Chair Roulette.
I am present. If you can, please stand with me for a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. City Manager, do we have any agenda items that need to be moved around or modified?
No, we do not, sir.
All right. I'll take a motion for approval of the agenda.
Sullivan, I'll move it.
Wiley, second.
Roll call.
Councilmember Stockton.
Yes.
Councilmember Ritchie.
Yes.
Councilmember Silva.
Yes.
Councilmember Roberts.
Yes.
Councilmember Wiley.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Sullivan.
Yes.
Mayor Roulette.
Aye. We'll move to item 4, approval of the minutes. Can I get a motion?
Silva, motion. Stockton, I second.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Ritchie.
Yes.
Councilmember Silva.
Yes.
Councilmember Roberts.
Yes.
Councilmember Wiley.
Yes.
Councilmember Stockton.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Sullivan.
Yes.
Mayor Roulette.
Aye. Before we move to the consent, or actually presentations, I was just going to recuse myself for items 9C and 12B tonight to avoid any potential conflicts of interest. I'm going to recuse myself from those 2 items. I do not believe that there is a conflict, but out of the abundance of caution, I'm going to recuse myself on those items until we have FPPC approval. Anybody else need to recuse themselves from any item tonight?
Yes, sir. This is Councilmember Roberts.
Yes, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I'm going to recuse myself from the labor negotiations aspect of anything regarding the Police Officer Association negotiations due to I currently have a family member which resides with me that was recently hired by the police department.
Okay. With that, we will move on to presentations. Mr. City Manager.
Yes, thank you. I'll turn it over to Aaron Morris, our Director of Community Development, for a brief presentation.
Thank you, Mayor and City Manager. This is Erin Morris, Director of Community Development. Before the council is a proclamation in honor of Community Planning Month. I'm not going to read the proclamation into the record, but essentially it recognizes the value of community planning to make places like Vacaville better for where people live and work. And we celebrate this as part of a national recognition of the value of community planning. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, I'll read a couple of the whereases. Whereas change is constant and affects cities, towns, suburbs, counties, boroughs, townships, rural areas, and other places. Whereas community planning and plans have helped manage this change in a way that provides better choices for how people work and live. Whereas the community planning provides an opportunity for all residents to be meaningfully involved in making choices that determine the future of their community. And now, therefore, being resolved, I, Ron Roulette, Mayor, on behalf of the City Council, do proclaim October 2021 designated as Community Planning Month in the city of Vacaville in conjunction with celebrating the National Community Planning Month. So thank you very much. we will move on to consent calendar. Anybody from the council want to pull anything off the consent? I see none. Do we have any hands in the audience? I hear none. I'm going to close public comment, entertain motion.
So motion to approve the consent calendar?
Thank you.
Ms.
All right.
Roberts, a second.
Thank you. Can I get a roll call, please?
Councilmember Silva,
Yes.
Councilmember Roberts,
Yes.
Councilmember Wiley,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Sullivan,
Yes.
Councilmember Stockton,
Yes.
Councilmember Ritchie,
Yes.
Mayor Rowland.
Aye. Okay, we'll move on to public hearings. No, excuse me, business from the floor. This is the time to address the city council with any issues that are not on the agenda, but are within the council's subject matter jurisdiction. Is there anybody on the phones tonight? Hearing none, I'm going to close.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Go ahead, ma'am.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
No, that's
maybe I raised
okay.
my-
We usually call it out. I don't have it in front of me, but go ahead, ma'am.
No problem. Well, good evening, and I wanted to start off by thanking the council for all of your hard work. I wanted to, on behalf of Empower Solano, to remind people that the pandemic is not even close to being over, and to encourage everyone to not only wear your mask, but also to get the vaccine, and also to make people aware that the booster is available, and to love each other. The one thing that the council and everyone has within their power is to be kind to each other and to be civil. And thanks again for your hard work. Have a great evening.
Thank you. We'll take Lori Jones.
Lori, I'll unmute your mic.
Great, thank you. I'd like to,
Lori,
I'm sorry, can you hear me now?
there you go. Yeah, go ahead,
Okay.
ma'am.
I'm terribly sorry. I know that talking about being able to talk about items that are not on tonight's agenda, but I'd like to speak on an item that's in closed session that we cannot speak on because we will not be attending.
Yeah, we'll open it under closed session right before we head to closed session. We'll open that item and then you can speak on it at that time.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you. Next caller. I see no other callers. I'm going to close public comment. And we'll move to item 8A, Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. This large item is related to the vehicle miles traveled item. With that, I will turn it over to Christina Love, Senior Planner, who will introduce the topic for you tonight.
Thank you, City Manager. Good morning, or I'm sorry, good evening, Mayor and Council members. So I'll first start off by saying late this afternoon, we did receive additional emails and correspondences in addition to the 2 public comments you received earlier. One was from a member of Discovery Builders and another from their attorney. Those emails have been forwarded on to you, I believe. So I'm going to get right back into my introduction now. So tonight we present to you our proposed amendments for the general plan related to the vehicle miles traveled and to the general plan's energy and conservation action strategy, or the ECAS. These are the documents that were presented to Planning Commission in August. Planning Commission recommended that City Council approve them as you are receiving them. This item is in response to state legislation and a mandate by the California Office of Planning and Research, or OPR, to identify the average distance of vehicles that are likely to travel in and around Vacaville, and then to find and adopt strategies to reduce those miles by at least 15%. Our strategy here, as the city consultants will better explain for you, has been to be consistent with the OPR recommendations and to analyze the land uses that are designated in our general plan map as they are currently designated so that development projects that are consistent with that map do not have to redo the VMT analysis efforts. This is in effect to help streamline projects that are consistent or meet with the general plan. If a project is not consistent or proposes to change a general plan land use designation, the applicant seeking to do that would be required to do a separate VMT analysis for their project to determine if there are any potential changes or impacts to the VMT analysis, and then to figure out how they're going to reduce those impacts specific to that project. Additionally, we are presenting our recommendations to the ECAS, which is simply put the city's menu of strategies that projects can implement to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and impacts. We are required to review the ECAS every 5 years or so and to update it if and where possible. Here, since GHGs are so closely linked to vehicles and transportation, it was smart to review the two at the same time and get the two documents together. The ECAS, however, is not limited to vehicle emissions and transportation. It does also address other things like business operation emissions, water and electricity, energy, and other sources that contribute to greenhouse gases. So in summary, the VMT strategy is to analyze, our strategy was to analyze the general plan, as currently is approved, so that projects that are consistent with the general plan are streamlined, and then to provide a menu for projects to implement to help reduce their impacts for greenhouse gases and for vehicle miles traveled. With us tonight, on this project, I also have our city traffic engineer, Gwen Owens from the Public Works Traffic Division, who's also a project lead, and two representatives from our consultants, John Gard from Fair & Peers, who's our expert in VMT, and Brian Gradage from Dudek, who's our consultant on the ECAS and the supplemental EIR before you. With that, I will turn it over to Brian.
Thank you, Christina. And good evening, members of the council. It's a pleasure to bring this project before you tonight. I'm just going to go over each of those three elements that Christina mentioned very briefly. If we can go to the next slide here. Thank you. And as mentioned, that is an amendment to the general plan transportation element, the update of the current 2015 Energy Conservation Action Strategy, or ECAS. And sort of the third leg of the stool is the supplemental EIR. And it ties these two actions together. And actually, as Christina mentioned, is one of the main tools in providing some regulatory relief to future projects. And John Gard is going to provide a little more detail on that topic about how VMT is assessed for future projects that come before the city. So let's talk about the amendment a little bit. Next slide. As Christina mentioned, this is an amendment just to the transportation element. The land use element was not changed. So the land use classifications used in the VMT analysis are as they currently exist. So this amendment brings the transportation element in line with current state law, and it would recognize vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, as the standard for evaluating the environmental effects of new development. And this has resulted from several state actions, starting with Senate Bill 743, which then went through the 2018 CEQA guidelines amendment process and the 2018 update. And there's a technical document that then supports those guidelines, known as the technical advisory on evaluating transportation impacts in CEQA. Level of service, and this is of course the traditional measure of congestion. It basically measures delay on roadways and at intersections. That remains. It is no longer the standard by which you will view projects under CEQA, under the California Environmental Quality Act, but it remains an important planning tool, and it remains in the general plan for the city to consider its transportation network. The general plan transportation element currently contains policies on promoting alternative transportation to try and reduce particularly single occupancy vehicle trips. those policies provided a good building block, which this amendment builds on in order to further reduce vehicle miles traveled and promote alternative transportation where feasible. Next slide, please. And as Christina mentioned, VMT is intricately tied to greenhouse gases. In fact, greenhouse gases were really the prime driver of how the city decided what its VMT thresholds should be. The 2015 ECAS was meant to be a 5-year plan. It was designed to meet the state's 2020 GHG reduction goals, which it did. So this was timely in more than one way. This was the 5th year of the plan. We've already passed the 2020 reduction goals. And of course, VMT is a major component of the emissions inventory. So having that fresh data made this really the right time to update the ECAS, which looks at 2030, 2035 reduction goals and also looks ahead to the next major milestone, which is the 2050 reduction goals. Next slide, please. Here's a visual of that. This is in metric tons equivalent. So basically, greenhouse gases are converted into a common currency, if you will, which is carbon dioxide, and that is measured in metric tons, which is about 10% bigger than a traditional ton. The 2020 goal that the ECAS was designed to meet was 941,722 metric tons equivalent. And it did that. Your current inventory is, or the inventory at that time was approximately 844,000. So the ECAS was a success. The next goal is the 2030 target of 565,000. We actually fast forwarded to 2035, and that's in order to align ourselves with the city's other planning documents, like the general plan, like the VMT regional travel demand model. And there the target is 470,861. And as we can see on the next slide, we can flip there, slide 6, there we go. The ECAS is projected to get us to 454,000. So we would beat that 2035 target by about 16,000 metric tons. This table here is actually table 25 in the ECAS. It shows the categories where we get reductions, and each of those reduction strategies is then spelled out in detail in Chapter 3, and it provides the implementation and also the co-benefits, because when you reduce energy use, there are other benefits, environmental benefits, social benefits that you get from that. Next slide, please. And of course, amending the general plan is itself an action that is subject to CEQA. So we get two things from the supplemental EIR. And by the way, it's called a supplement because we have left the 2015 general plan EIR as it was, with just the two areas that we were interested in, transportation and GHG, being updated. So the other areas, such as biological resources, cultural resources, those are not changed by any of this, and they remain as per the 2015 general plan EIR. So that provides our compliance with CEQA, but moving forward, CEQA provides a tool which is that projects consistent with a general plan, which an EIR has been certified for, can rely on that EIR for issues that are regional, that are citywide. And of course, greenhouse gases, regional vehicle miles traveled, those are global issues. So by certifying this supplemental EIR for the general plan amendment, future projects will have a streamlined path of review. The key thought here is projects that are too large to be screened out of doing a VMT analysis or a GHG analysis could potentially trigger an EIR, even though they might not be very large projects. But having this framework in place that we're bringing forward tonight, you would avoid having those kind of duplicative EIRs that slow down projects and add to the price tag. So with that, I will turn it over to John to talk about how that function actually works.
Thanks, Brian. Again, I'm John Gard. I'm a principal of Fair and Peers in the Sacramento office. And nice to be here this evening, Mayor and members of the council. Can you please, next slide? And I'll jump right into the VMT analysis. Next. Okay, as Brian mentioned, the supplemental EIR evaluated on a citywide basis the effects on VMT and found that VMT per dwelling unit and per 1,000 square feet of non-residential by individual land use type would exceed the applicable standard. And again, that standard is 15% below existing threshold per the OPR technical advisory. So that was identified as a significant impact, and mitigation is in the form of recommended mitigation of implementing TDM, which stands for Transportation Demand Management strategies to reduce VMT. And since this is land use, there are VMT strategy reductions that are land use related, carpool, things like that. The supplemental EIR also focused on city roadway improvements, because when roadways are added or widened, it does have the potential to cause induced travel. And OPR's technical advisory talks about that as a potential area of effect. And so the draft supplemental EIR identified significant impacts associated with that as well, due to increased VMT caused by planned city roadway widening projects. And again, same type of mitigation TDM strategies, however, this time focused on reducing VMT associated with roadway capacity. So more focusing on other modes of travel. Next slide, please. I will just gloss over this simply because I think Christina and Brian have already done a nice job of summarizing the streamlining that is afforded by the approach being taken on this project. However, I did want to mention really quickly that this doesn't preclude a project from not having to do any mitigation whatsoever. Still, there are mitigations for VMT impacts that those that are considered feasible would still need to be implemented. So we are doing our best to protect the environment in that respect. The other thing I want to point out on this slide is that the roadway improvement, by focusing on VMT impacts there, calling those significant and identifying mitigation, that actually is very helpful to the city, because a lot of cities right now are dealing with roadway capacity increasing projects that cause VMT impacts. And because of that, there's a potential to have to do an EIR only for that purpose alone. So by virtue of this approach, this is one way that the city doesn't have to pay for timely and expensive EIRs just on this grounds. Next slide, please. So the technical advisory talks about certain types of projects that are presumed to have a less than significant VMT impact. And you can see from the slide here, 5 specific types of projects. I won't go into the details of them, but they're based on their size and types of modes that are available and types of uses and whatnot. But the other thing that is provided for in the technical advisory that a lot of other agencies are also taking advantage of and applying is project screening. And really what that amounts to is looking at areas of a city that are known as low VMT generating zones. So areas of the city that close to downtown, for instance, that have shorter travel distances, more walkable, that type of thing. And so projects that are proposed in those areas may be presumed less than significant. And what has been put together for the city is a series of implementation guidelines that would be followed, and the city has already used this on a couple of projects already. Next slide. Thank you. As Brian mentioned, level service will not be found in EIRs any longer, but it is still used outside of CEQA to help identify when certain improvements are necessary, sizing of infrastructure, that type of thing. EIRs will still look at other transportation modes, walking, biking, transit, emergency response, hazardous conditions, safety, that type of stuff. And then also what's been put together as part of this effort is an update to the city's transportation element to reconcile the changing roles of what level service now is its role versus what VMT's role is. So with that, I will conclude, and I think I'm going to turn this over to, Christina to continue. Thank you.
So I believe the next slide, please. That actually concludes our presentation. So it is staff's recommendation or to take the recommended action of certifying the supplemental EIR, adopting the amendment to the general plan circulation element, and adopting the updated ECAS.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I'm going to open it up to public comment. I see no hands from public comment. I'm going to close public comment, bring it back to the council. Councilmember Wiley.
I just had a question on the low level of service that he just mentioned, and he mentioned that one place was downtown. So do we have any other areas in Vacaville that are low VMT zones?
You want to answer that, Gwen, or should I? Yeah, please, Gwen.
Go ahead, John, if you can answer that.
Yeah, very good question. So what is in the implementation guidelines are maps showing areas that do have low VMT areas. And the maps are actually by different land use types. So there's certain areas that are efficient for multifamily. There's other areas that are efficient for office and for retail. It varies by land use type. And then these maps are also prepared for both sort of opening or, existing conditions as well as, the year 2050 build out, or cumulative condition as well. So it really depends on the type of land use though, as to where their areas are efficient. There are some areas south of 80 that are also low VMT areas.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Roberts.
Yeah, thank you. Second question. Last time this was brought up, I was asking about how the increase in hybrid electric vehicles as well as ultra low emissions vehicles are going to be included into this. Is there any timeline for when these policies are going to be updated to reflect that? Because if the primary aspect is reduce greenhouse gases, if it's not considering that 100 miles driven in an electric vehicle is definitely producing a lot less greenhouse gases than that of a big truck or an SUV or an older vehicle. So do you have a timeline of when do you think that will be updated to reflect the changing in type of consumer vehicles out there?
This is Gwen. I'm going to refer it to Brian from DUDAC.
Yes. Let's see. Christina, could you flip up to the line graph? I think that would really be help. It's an excellent question. And I think the line graph is just about 4 slides above this, right around slide 7 or 8, maybe.
I believe that would be Crystal. I'm in charge of that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No worries. There we go.
Yeah, there you go.
Thank you, Crystal. Yes, excellent question. So with regards to things like hybrids and hybrid use, part of that is driven by increases in vehicle fuel efficiency standards and tailpipe emission standards. So this gold line here that you see goes from 840 and then goes up to over 1 million in the year 2035. That's basically what if we do nothing? So that reflects the increase in greenhouse gases if BAU is business as usual. It means we do nothing. The blue line is called adjusted business as usual, and that takes into account those sort of statewide or federal actions that we expect to lower greenhouse gases, so that you can see we go from an area where greenhouse gases increase every year to where these actions, and hybrid vehicles, electric vehicles are an important part of that calculation, where greenhouse gas goes down every year. But it doesn't get us all the way there. So we talk about this gap between the adjusted business as usual and the target. And so the ECAS, it supports hybrid vehicles, electric vehicles. It also has some more aggressive policies in terms of trying to get ahead of state regs for things like vehicle charging stations and incorporating those into residential development. So yes, it does take those kind of technological changes and build on them. And those are really vital to get us there, because as we've discussed as part of the VMT analysis, it's harder to reduce that without really big land use changes that we don't have on the table now. So those technological changes are key, and we do incorporate those.
Okay, and that's another following question. I don't know if you guys have this information. Is there a way to get a slightly more accurate picture of how Vacaville is doing with the greenhouse gas emissions? And like, for example, being able to pull like a DMV database on the percentage of vehicles which are electric, hybrid, within Vacaville itself?
We have we think good data in terms of our inventory, in terms of how we're doing relative with the vehicle fleet. That's a good question. I don't think we had great data on that. The good thing is that the ECAS is monitored annually as it's implemented, so we have the opportunity to incorporate that data as it comes in and see how we're doing, because obviously more aggressive use of those kind of vehicles, really, they would go a long way in terms of making sure we meet these targets.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Roberts, do you want to make a motion?
This is Stockton. I'll make a motion that we adopt the staff recommendation.
Thank you.
Silva, second.
Roll call, please.
Councilmember Roberts,
Yes.
Councilmember White,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Sullivan,
Yes.
Councilmember Stockton,
Yes.
Councilmember Ritchie,
Yes.
Councilmember Silva,
Yes, just a quick comment. Thanks for all the work that you put into this. Yes.
and Mayor Roulette.
Aye. We'll move to 9A, Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. This next item is the approval of the design for the Vacaville Trail Public Art Project. Melody Ocampo, our Recreation Manager, has a brief presentation for you.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and members of the Council. It is my pleasure this evening to present you the Rocky Hill Trail Public Art Project. Next slide. Thank you. The city's Department of Housing Services applied and was awarded a National Endowment for the Arts Challenge America grant for $10,000, which the city was required to match for a total of $20,000 for this public art project. The NEA Challenge America program focuses on projects in economically disadvantaged neighborhoods to engage, inspire, and expand the reach of arts in the community. As such, in addition to the fund matching requirement, the grant requires public outreach to provide input into the design and character of the art piece. Next slide. In September of 2019, members of the Arts Advisory Committee and city staff hosted a booth at the Night Out on Rocky Hill Trail event where over 140 community members were surveyed. The survey asked if the role of the art project should capture neighborhood identity, inspire creativity, promote social change, or beautify the area. The majority of respondents answered that the role of the artwork was to beautify the area while providing an interactive element. Staff then took this community feedback and released a request for statements of qualifications and proposals. Next slide. While community engagement is not specifically mentioned in the Art and Public Places policy, it aligns with one of the city's core values, inclusivity, and was a critical component of this project. In accordance with the Art and Public Places policy adopted by City Council in 2007, this project was a collaborative effort with city staff and a project committee comprised of 2 members from the Arts Advisory Committee, an appointed body of the community members from the Vacaville Arts community that advises the Parks and Recreation Commission on matters of public art. Per the policy, the project committee used the open competition acquisition method to acquire an artist for the project. Following the artist selection, additional community engagement occurred and there was an evolution of designs for the project based on the community's feedback. This past spring, staff presented the design options to the Arts Advisory Committee and the Parks and Recreation Commission, who unanimously recommended the design that reflects the community's preferences. Next slide. The community's preference for a piece that beautifies the trail while providing an interactive element was included in the recruitment for artists through a request for statements of qualifications and proposals, or SOQP, which was released on December 15th in 2019. Advertising for this request included the Park and Recreation Department's social media pages, and the acting PIO at the time, Public Information Officer, that is, was provided the information to post on the city's social media outlets in addition to other media sources. The information was also shared with the Parks and Recreation Department's art instructors, and members of the Arts Advisory Committee were asked to share the opportunity within the arts community. The deadline for artists to submit their qualifications and preliminary conceptual design was January 8th, 2020. There were 3 submissions received, as you see here, 2 of which were from the same artist, with the only difference being the shoes on the wild pig. The project committee was presented all 3 design submissions and made the decision to go with artist Leslie Molera's proposal, not only for her conceptual design, but based on her qualifications. Leslie is a Vacaville resident who has owned and operated a mural and decorative design business for over 20 years. She has taught art at Buckingham Charter School and at an after-school program at Markham Elementary. You might also be familiar with some of Leslie's other murals around town, including Maximum Fitness's Pool Wall, Napoli's Italian Restaurant, and RW Garage Doors exterior mural. If this project continues to move forward, Leslie would like to include at least 4 middle or high school students from the Markham residential area to be hands-on with the experience in creating and painting the proposed community work of art. High school age students residing in the area are encouraged to apply for residency to assist in the rendering and painting of the landscape art panels, as well as contribute to design elements that will be featured later in the presentation. Next slide. Our original plan was to host a community meeting at the project site shortly following the project award. However, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the scheduling of this meeting was delayed for over a year until eventually it was decided to move forward with a virtual meeting hosted on December 22nd of this year. I'm sorry, of 2020. At the December meeting, artist Leslie Molera and staff presented the conceptual design from her proposal and requested feedback. Many of community members had strong opinions on the artwork, expressing that the proposed design was not to their liking. Leslie offered to redesign the work and took suggestions from the community on what they wanted to see. The overall feedback was that the design was not representative of the community's diversity or culture, and community members suggested an impressionist style with elements such as wings, Aztec and Mayan images, children reading books, the sun, poppies, animals, people of various skin tones, and high contrast colors, all to be incorporated into the work. Next slide. On February 22nd of this year, a second virtual community meeting was held and the artists presented 5 new designs. Throughout the new designs, Leslie took opportunities to incorporate the community suggestions from the December meeting. During the meeting, attendees voted on their preferred design options in the 3 design categories that you see, with the wings bordered in red, panels of people bordered in yellow or gold, and interactive elements, which are bordered here in black. During the meeting, community members questioned the use of the black silhouettes for the people in the designs rather than using the requested variety of skin tones. Next slide. In response to that comment, the artists created an additional design, as you see pictured here, working in more opportunities and also worked in more opportunities for local student artists to contribute to the design of the artwork through the selection of an inspirational quote and incorporation of cultural graphics designed by the students. Next slide. At a special meeting of the Arts Advisory Committee held on March 24th, 2021, staff presented 4 total options, including 3 design combinations and the option to completely restart the project. The Arts Advisory Committee commented in favor of option 1, the panel that you see pictured here. Public comments received during that meeting included an emphasis on the importance of inclusivity, diversity, and color. Community members, in response to this panel, spoke about wanting to see themselves through Black and brown skin tones and Indigenous images. And one commenter asked if the artist could revise the silhouette design, again, as you see here, to incorporate more realistic depictions of people in the artwork. And the artist responded accordingly. Next slide. So as you see featured in green, the artist did incorporate the various skin tones that the community members asked for, and the Arts Advisory Committee agreed that that would be ideal in order to incorporate the vision of the community as well as honor the artwork that was done by the artist. Staff also engaged the community through an online survey advertised to the public, most notably through flyers on the Rocky Hill Trail. The results of the survey was available in both English and Spanish. The survey was put out in both English and Spanish, and the results was that 50 community members responded. These survey results were presented to the Arts Advisory Committee at their regular meeting on April 14th, 2021. And as we go through these next slides, you will see the preferred design for each element bordered in green. The panel artwork highlighted here did receive 50% of the vote. So it was the most favored. Next slide. There were 3 butterfly wing options, and again, highlighted in green was the most favored. The butterfly wings received 50% votes in favor of this design. Next slide. The interactive element included 2 options. The pillars, these will be small pillars located along the trail, and the pull-up bars, which could potentially have been attached to the panels. The pillars overwhelmingly received 59% of the vote on the survey. And please note that the designs that you see here are likely to change, as the intent is that the students would contribute to the design element of these pillars. Next slide. So the following 3 slides will be a bit repetitive. They're going to take us through all the design elements that are recommended by both the Arts Advisory Committee and the Parks and Recreation Commission. These are all images that you've just seen, and you will see the recommendation is in complete alignment with the survey results. If approved, this design will be placed facing the south side. This specific design, these panels of people and landscape, will be on the south side of the trail entrance off Markham Avenue in 2 parallel sections, with the 4 panels separated in the middle between the woman you see pushing the stroller and the child playing soccer. Next slide. The butterfly wings featured here will be on the back side of 2 of the panels that were shown in the previous slide, and will face oncoming traffic heading north on Markham Avenue. The remaining 2 panel sides will feature wayfinding text marking the Markham Avenue entrance to the Rocky Hill Trail, as well as cultural graphics and an inspirational quote selected and painted by students working with artist Leslie Malera. Next slide. The art students will also select and paint the pillars that are to be located across the trail path, across from the panel artwork. So the pillars shown, and again, will be art student designs. Next slide. In total, the artwork will consist of 4 metal panels that are double-sided, the butterfly design, 2 sides of which will be facing oncoming traffic, the people/landscape design, which will face the trail path, and the new student-designed pillars. The youth-designed art with wayfinding text, which will consist of 2 sides of the panels, which will face oncoming traffic, and youth-designed concrete pillars across the trail from the panel artwork. The entire project is to be installed at the Markham Avenue entrance to the Rocky Hill Trail, as shown by the star on the map. Next slide. These images will hopefully give you a better visual of the placement of the artwork. As you can see from the bird's eye view, the artwork will be staggered so that it is visible to both trail users and drivers. In the street view drawing on the right, please note that the butterfly design will not be directly behind the first 2 panels, but staggered as shown on the left, to allow all the artwork to be showcased. Next slide. Tonight, the City Council is tasked with reviewing the recommended design for approval. If the proposed design is approved, artist Leslie Malera will select local artists to assist with the creation of the artwork and order materials. Public Works staff will work with a contractor to prepare the site location for installation of the 4 metal panels and the 4 concrete pillars that will make up the new public art piece. And the installation is scheduled to be completed by December of this year. Next slide. At this time, I will happily take any questions or comments.
We're going to open up to public comment, and I do see 1 hand up already.
Beatrice Cadenas, I'll open your mic.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, ma'am.
All right. So thank you so much for putting on this project. I've been part of some of the Zoom calls, and I was out on the trail too, putting in, my opinion and stuff. And I'm really happy that the artist has been very receptive to the community's input. I do want to make a comment just about, being more culturally relevant and adding more culture to this, because the design is nice. And I know there was something about quotations being added. And I just want to give like a brief historical cultural approach, I guess. The monarch butterfly is very important to, like, it's very important to like the immigration community. It's kind of you know, because it migrates. So in immigration spaces, the monarch butterfly represents and uplifts migrant communities, and I think it's really powerful and beautiful. Also, you know, this neighborhood is composed of a lot of different people from different backgrounds and different ethnicities, and I think it would be really cool, and it would be really empowering, along with that butterfly, to put a quote that really empowers the migrant community that is in this Markham neighborhood. So I just wanted to make note of that, because to some, like, that monarch butterfly might just be something to beautify the trail, but it actually holds a lot of, it's a powerful symbol for immigrant rights. So I just wanted to note that. And also, I think this is a great direction in continuing to uplift the communities here in the Markham neighborhood, and just adding more representation to our neighborhood. And, you know, so that's awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm going to close public comment. I'm going to bring it back to the council. Anybody from the council want to comment? I see Councilmember Wiley.
Thank you, and thanks for the presentation. I think it looks really nice. When I was looking at the information in the packet and things, I just kind of looked at those pillars from the artistic point of view. But then, since you're calling it interactive, I just wanted to clarify, this probably sounds like a stupid question, but are they going to be then designed for kids to jump up and jump from one pillar to another? Because that's what kids do when they see things like that. So is it that kind of interactive?
Yeah, absolutely. So interactive can be something passive where someone is sitting on a pillar reading a book, or exactly what you mentioned, jumping from one pillar to another, hop skipping along, jumping off the trail onto the pillar and back and forth. It was something that is designed to be fun and used by community members and youth in particular.
Well, I just wanted to make sure that there was a safety element, and that they're not going to be so close to each other that some little kid is going to jump off of one and fall and hit their head on the other one. So that all needs to be, really thought out when they're being installed.
Absolutely. We have expert engineers who are working on drawings as we speak to ensure that they are safe for use with that intent.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
Councilmember Roberts.
I actually have quite a few things to discuss about this. Not necessarily the art itself, but the process. So one of the things that I noticed was there's really only 2 artists that submitted for 3 different proposals. I know you mentioned how it was advertised, but I think that some of the advertising was just bare minimal effort. It's just advertising on city sites and the PIO put on social media isn't necessarily going to reach artists in the community, because you kind of have to follow those pages in order to see that information being put out. And on the city pages itself, it's extremely difficult to navigate. So unless you're looking for it specifically, it's almost impossible to find information regarding these projects. As far as the RFP submittal time frame, it says from December 5th to January 8th, which also includes 2 major holidays. And personally, I don't think that's enough time to get any reasonable submittals submitted into the committee for proposals. And with 2, like you mentioned, that there was that different people from Arts Advisory and Parks and Rec went out and reached out to the community. I'm pretty certain if I went into Solano Community College's more advanced art program and said, hey, we want to do a $20,000 mural project in Vacaville, who's interested? You probably would have had the entire class raise their hand to submit for this project. So I think there wasn't due diligence done for this type of project. And then kind of going into the qualifications on the RFP, there's, let me pull it up real quick, is broken down by 20% artist qualifications, 10% design and creativity for public art, 20% for previous work of similar nature, and 40% design concept. I think if you're looking for good artists, you need to get rid of the formal education aspect of it, because I know a ton of excellent artists that have no formal training or have done similar work with cities, but have done stuff of similar size and stature of what we were asking for. So yeah, moving forward on this, I'd really like to see the city do proper advertising. I mean, heck, you can ask some of the city council members to go down to community college and ask if people are interested in doing this type of artwork. But refine the RFP process to reflect more art. It's the more unnecessary stuff you add in there, you're going to reduce the likelihood of good artists that may not have those qualifications apply, because they're going to look at it and be like, oh, I don't want to deal with this. You need to make the application for murals much easier and more inclusive of those without formal training or necessarily have done other works of art like that for cities. And like I said, a lot of this stuff is extremely difficult to find, even for myself. I'm tech savvy, browsing the sites, trying to find the archive meetings for the arts advisory. And then getting into the art itself is like, it's good art, but I don't think putting art of people on a trail while you're on a trail is like, you should be experiencing something different from the art than what you're physically experiencing in that area. And so it's like, I'd rather see art that people will travel there to see, and then they'll use the trail because they're already there. I mean, that's just my own sense of art taste. It's not necessarily a reflection on the artist itself. I actually think it's a good piece, just not for that particular section where it's located. And then, yeah, the engagement. Yeah, I think you guys did a good job with the general engagement, going out and talking to people. Although I would like to see more engagement with the, you did some online stuff looking for comments. You could have gone door to door and probably received more comments on the art and chosen, because there was only 50 people that submitted online. Let's see. And then in the, as far as the staff recommendation goes, it mentioned that it could delay or, sorry, I'm going back to the actual alternatives. So this could potentially impact city's good standing with the NEA and the outcome of 2 pending grant applications. I'd like to get rid of those coulds or woulds and get more definitive answers, and somebody reach out to them and say, hey, if we delay this again, this will affect it or this won't affect it, and you can have an extension. So the vague language, I'd like to see more, because what it does is it leaves an option like, hey, if we don't do this, it might affect us in the future. I'd rather have a more definitive answer on, hey, this will affect you if you don't do it. And with that, something that we brought up on several other meetings in the past is don't give us items right before the deadline is due. And so even if we want to implement changes, if it happened to be a major change, there wouldn't be enough time to actually implement those before the deadline. So with that, it's like, yeah, we brought up numerous times, do proper backwards planning to give us appropriate time to make a decision. And then if there are changes, there's time to make changes. And then for the most recent portion that hasn't been done yet is the student art deadline is October 4th on Monday. So my question to probably Melody on this is, how are you guys reaching out to student artists? And please don't say just social media. If you're not showing up to the schools to actually try to recruit students, I don't think you're doing your best effort for this art project.
To answer that question, no, that we're reaching out directly to art teachers. The idea is that, you know, there are students who are interested in art and taking art classes, and will have that formal education from their instructor, as well as would get additional education through the artist who is working on this project.
Okay, with that, I'd like to, I mean, I'll probably come with most, but maybe extend that out a little bit and actually have somebody from Parks and Recs, the Arts Advisory Committee, to show up at the schools in conjunction with the school district. And because it's a little bit different, art teacher saying something versus somebody from the city actually going there and advocating and asking students if they want to participate. And that would go a long ways with the community of actually being involved and making sure people are doing with that. And one last thing for the staff. Can we make it easier to find the arts advisory stuff? Because I don't see much of their archive meetings, or they're not posted on the city agenda thing. Go to the Parks and Rec and all that stuff, but trying to find the archive arts advisory stuff is kind of difficult to do, because I was looking for when I was trying to research this topic a little bit more.
All right, Councilmember Silva.
Right. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for actually the public comment. I've been involved in I was involved in these original talks, tuned in, heard a lot of community input. So I really appreciate the working back and forth. I appreciate a lot of Councilmember Roberts' comments as well, as far as engagement. And just to kind of echo two requests, just in general, when we're trying to engage, communities that typically have folks that are more underrepresented or underserved, respectively, there's not going to be much engagement, particularly on social media or emails. It really does require that face-to-face interaction. And I know it's been difficult with respect to COVID, and also just the ability to fit it in fit the time into our schedules. But there's a much different outcome once we actually truly engage folks face-to-face. And it also allows us a chance for them to get to know our city staff and our intentions. And it gets a chance for city staff to stay in contact and connect with the folks that we serve as public servants. I will say that I really like the rejected art pieces. I dig the chucks. So I appreciate the chucks. But I understand why the public went with the other option. It would be nice to have these meetings actually recorded and posted on our website. So I just wanted to echo that. I just want to clarify two additional components. So is there still going to be an inspirational quote worked on into this work?
Yes.
And,
Oh, I apologize. Yes, that is part of that, something that the students would work on. Okay.
I'd like to honor again, as someone who lives in the area and just listening to the folks and the folks during these meetings, and actually one of the callers that called in, having some type of quote that kind of ties into the travels, since it is a trail that connects folks, connects particularly a lot of mothers that are and families that are going shopping, going to work. So having some type of quote that kind of represents just that drive and resiliency, I think would be key. I'd appreciate if someone kind of ran it by at least me, or somehow put it through community. I guess some more community feedback on that. Representing diversity is very challenging. When I Googled cultural diverse street art, I see a bunch of different examples, a lot of beautiful, colorful examples. One of them, I think if we put up any one of them by itself, there would be criticism over it. So I think that in itself is a huge challenge. I think that the positioning of the art in itself is something that what I really hope happens out of this is that it gets folks much more engaged as they have, and that we can actually create an entire trail that really represents not just diversity, but something that has a focus on empowering families, has a focus on empowering women. That's something that I didn't quite expect to hear so much of when I was going door to door in the area. A lot of concerns about the well-being of women, particularly those who are not too familiar with our systems, who may have language barriers, and the impact that those domestic issues were having on themselves and their kids. To me, to have something uniquely different that's a draw, that folks can invest in or sponsor different panels that highlight the beautiful diversity that this country has, the beautiful history and country that this area has, with all the ups and downs that goes through a neighborhood ran advisory committee, is something that we're as a neighborhood some of us are trying to put together. So anybody out there listening that's interested, please shoot me an email or shoot me a text, and we'll try to connect. But that said, I do appreciate the efforts, the engagement that's been going on and the adjustments. Last question is, what will go on the front panel?
When you say the front panel, Crystal, could you maybe go back a couple slides? I want to make sure let's go to slide 17. If you're considering the front panel, that youth art, that would be, the youth art with the wayfinding text, and then the cultural graphics and inspirational quote. So that would be those two panels that would be facing the street, oncoming traffic on Market Avenue.
I apologize. I don't know what wayfinding is.
Oh, basically it would say Rocky Hill Trail. So it's hard to see, but in the drawing on the right, the penciled in Rocky Hill Trail, and it just says youth art. And there would be signatures of the artists, the student artists, as well as artist Leslie Malera on maybe some of the other pieces that are actually designed by her, but the student signatures would be there. That would be what I assume you mean by the front panel.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I guess my main concern is if this is supposed to be like a front centerpiece, I guess my concern is like if it's too many, a lot of signatures that kind of take it up. Or I'm curious to see if there's other ways to work that in, maybe handprints or I don't know, something like that. Because I think the goal and the emphasis from the city was to make sure that we put something on the interest that draws, that highlights the path and the trail and it makes it beautified. So I guess is that something that's going to be considered once it's finalized?
Absolutely. So that art will definitely be youth driven, and the intent is we are, actively seeking youth from the community. So it would absolutely have those ties to the community and again be per their vision and the graphics that are chosen.
Would there be based on the neighborhood or the volunteers?
Yes. Well, the volunteers should be from the neighborhood. That is what we are, who we're soliciting and who we're trying to actively get. So if you know of anyone, please send them our way.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Ritchie.
Hi. First and foremost, thanks for the staff for putting the presentation together. And I just really want to, I really appreciate Councilmember Silva kind of emphasizing the community. Hopefully the community gets more involved, engaged, and find ways to reach the community that wasn't online or had the ability about this project. I'm excited about it. I think art in public places is amazing. I think I would love us to come together and make sure this piece is amazing, get more input, get more engagement to make sure it really captures the emphasis of the Rocky Hill Trail. Growing up Vacaville, I can't tell you how you can on that. But I think art in public places, and I think it's a start. I think this is a great opportunity to kind of add through the first big piece and keep pressing forward. There's a lot of other neighborhoods throughout the city that this can be kind of the spark, this lights a flame to create art and bring the community together, diversity and paintings and pieces throughout the city. There's many areas, even in the Markham area, that we have more pieces and throughout different districts and parts of Vacaville. So there's a lot of great cities out there that are doing this. Sacramento has the Arts Public Places right now. There's cities in California, and I think it's a great opportunity to really just highlight areas that might have blight or bring walls to life to really show how important this community is and how people in the community can be engaged and use all of those things together. I'm not as critical. I think it's a great theme. I do believe, and I want to really reflect the Markham community. It's pretty amazing the comment from the public. Earlier this year, I took a trip to Mexico, and I actually learned the same thing about market butterflies, about how they migrate. So that was a pretty powerful message, and so I expect you guys are incorporating that in, and maybe to bring that, maybe a placard to explain that, like what that picture means. I think educational and at the same time would be pretty powerful too. But I just hopefully this is just a start of what we see throughout the whole city to just take a lot of, really bring a lot of life to it through art. That's it.
Councilmember Roberts.
I was make one more quick comment. After like spending this last week in Sacramento at a convention in downtown Sacramento, I highly encourage Melody, I mean, even anybody on that's listening to this call right now, is check out the Wide Open Walls program in Sacramento and the mural work that they do. And also the Soul Collective, which I know produces a lot of the artists for that Wide Open Walls. I see Councilmember Wiley has a hand up, so I'll wait till she has an opportunity to speak before, and then I'd like to make a motion after her.
Councilmember Wiley. Councilmember Wiley, your mic's not on. I don't know.
Okay, just a second. Could you tell us what the panels are made from? What materials they're made from?
They are metal panels, and we have the artist Leslie Malera on the line. Leslie, is there any additional information that you can add on the materials?
Yes, the panels are 4x8, 11 gauge steel panels.
So then the paint will adhere to them and they'll be vibrant for a long time?
Yes, it's going to be painted with theme park paint, the same kind of paint they use at theme parks like Disneyland.
All right, thank you very much.
Councilmember Roberts, do you want to make a motion?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and motion to approve this to move forward with one caveat. I'd like this to be a rotating piece, maybe after speaking with the Parks and Rec on an actual timeline, but I know a lot of cities do it, of making it maybe a 2-year project and then leave it up as is, and then a new artist comes in and puts up a new mural. So with that, yeah, I'd like to motion to move it forward as it is to maintain the good standing for the grant and get artwork up, get the community engaged, and make this a rotating piece of art.
Mrs. City Attorney, do we have to come up with that idea right now, or can we bring it down the line?
Are you suggesting make the motion without the rotating 2-year rotating cycle?
No, I don't mind making the motion with the rotating, but we're not being very specific. We're just saying possibly 2 years. Can in 2 years we bring it back to the council, or is this going to come back at a later date and then we can speak again about this rotating deal?
Mr. Mayor, this is Aaron Bush. If I could throw out just maybe another, not to further complicate this, but one of the things that I wanted to point out for the council's benefit is that staff has been working on a comprehensive update to our art and public places guidelines or policies, which would include a mural program and other pieces of art within the community. And I'm curious, there was a lot said about the process and having a more vibrant and robust type of art program. I'm curious, if there's an opportunity that maybe we hope to bring that to council at the beginning of next year. And perhaps when we have that bigger policy level discussion about, how big and grand we want to make that we can revisit coming back and talking about this turning into a rotating program or adding more to it in that area as part of that future program. Just a thought.
Yeah, I don't mind the motion as it stands. I'm just saying that at one point we're going to have to bring it back and be more specific on what we're going to do. But I would like to move it forward. I'm just making sure that we can just leave it generic in the motion and then come back in a year or two and tighten it up.
Yes, you can leave it generic as it is and with the direction to bring that back.
Perfect. I have a motion. Can I have a second, please?
Second.
On the question, roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Wiley?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Sullivan?
Yes.
Councilmember Stockton?
Yes.
Councilmember Ritchie,
Yes.
Councilmember Silva,
Yes.
Councilmember Roberts,
Yes.
Mayor Rolette.
Aye. We'll move to item 9B, Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. This next item is a contract to enter in with PlaceWorks to prepare the 2023 to 2031 housing element update. Tyler Hayes, our senior planner, has a brief presentation for us.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. So as the City Manager had noted, tonight's item before you is the contract for authorization for the City Manager and or his designee to enter into a contract with PlaceWorks for the purpose of updating the housing element, safety element, and our environmental justice element. Next slide, please. So I've already explained what tonight's purpose is. I do want to take just a moment to note that we are requesting that the City Council authorize a contract not to exceed approximately $419,000. I also want to note that there is a very small $10 typo on this slide. That last number on this slide should read $418,829,000. And that is the correct number noted in your staff report. Next slide, please. So the housing element is one of the 7 mandated general plan elements or chapters. However, unlike the other general plan elements, which are updated as needed, the housing element is required by state law to be updated every 8 years. In addition, everything that is included in our housing element is defined by housing element law. The government code section relating to housing element law is located on the slide. In general, our housing element contains goals, policies, and programs that look to conserve and protect existing housing, assist in the development of affordable housing, analyze and remove any undue governmental constraints, and promote equal housing opportunities for all income groups and all demographics. Lastly, unlike any of the other general plan elements, the housing element must be certified by the California Department of Housing and Community Development, also known as HCD. Next slide, please. So in addition to meeting the general goals and guidelines previously discussed, the housing element is the element of the general plan that really focuses and provides the opportunity for the city to meet its regional housing needs allocation, or RHNA for short. The easiest way to understand the RHNA is to think of it as the city's fair share of the state's housing need for this 8-year housing cycle. With this number, the various allocations are further divvied up into 4 income groups, ranging from very low income, moderate income, and above moderate income households. These income levels are defined by a certain percentage of the county's current area median income for a family of 4. The RHNA it can be seen as a complicated topic, and therefore we are proposing to come back to the City Council in the very near future to re-review what the RHNA is. Some of the City Council members may recall in April of this year, we did review the city's current RHNA number for this housing element cycle, and we also reviewed the city's annual progress report that identifies how well the city is doing in terms of meeting its state mandated requirements. Next slide, please. So other housing element contents include doing a housing needs assessment, that is to identify what types of housing we currently have and what additional housing types we need in order to meet our future needs. We evaluate our past performance with an annual report that goes to the state, and that is called our annual progress report. That is a document the City Council reviews at the beginning of every calendar year. We also look at identifying housing sites to meet our various household requirements based on income level. We also have a section that talks about the community engagement that took place during the creation of our housing element. We look at any government or non-governmental constraints in terms of what could be making housing production a little more challenging. This could be anything from city fees for government constraints to labor shortages in the non-governmental constraints category. And lastly, as we've briefly gone over, the housing element does contain a myriad of policies and programs that allows for the opportunity to provide various housing services as well as housing products. Next slide, please. So you may remember or recognize the graphic in front of you, and it was included in the staff report. And what this graphic shows is it is an illustration of all the various housing laws that have passed in the last few years that has led to various local government documents overlapping with one another to ensure that these documents are consistent with one another to help ensure that we have community viability. So rather than go through all of these, I'll just simply state that at a high level review, state law says the safety element must be updated concurrently with the housing element, which occurs every 8 years. The environmental justice element must occur concurrently with our housing element if it's been determined we have disadvantaged communities. And lastly, it states that we can incorporate what's called the local hazard mitigation plan into our safety element to ensure that the two documents are consistent in terms of meeting their goals. Next slide, please. So I provided a brief overview of the housing element, and now I'm going to take the next couple of slides to kind of go over the purpose of the other remaining documents we just discussed. So the goal of the safety element is to reduce both short and long-term risks from natural disasters, ranging from everything from fires all the way to other impacts resulting from climate change. As mentioned, this is a state-mandated document that must be updated concurrently with our housing element. Next slide. The goal of our environmental justice element is to facilitate transparency and public engagement in all of the city's public policy making and decisions. It is also focused on reducing pollutants and health risks in any community that may be identified as a disadvantaged community. It really focuses on providing equitable access to health-inducing benefits ranging from access to healthy food options to being within close proximity of recreational facilities. And the state law does permit the city to create a standalone environmental justice element or chapter in the general plan. However, it is encouraged, and staff is recommending that rather than making this a standalone document, we will be distributing these goals, policies, and programs throughout the general plan in the most appropriate chapter. So that is to say, anything land use related will be located in our land use element, whereas anything having to do with transportation would be located with our transportation element. Next slide, please. And lastly, out of the 4 documents we've talked about tonight, we have our local hazard mitigation plan. As mentioned, this is also another state mandated document. This document typically happens and is prepared at the county level. City staff is currently participating in the Solano County Local Hazard Mitigation Plan process, and the draft document is currently available online. Anyone wishing to see this document may either go to the link that has been provided in your staff report or simply Google the term Solano County Multi-Jurisdictional Hazard Mitigation Plan. Certain staff members within the city of Vacaville are currently reviewing all the comments received on this plan, and they will be bringing this plan back to the City Council in the near future for further discussion. Essentially, what the local hazard mitigation plan does is it looks at ways to reduce any type of potential hazards from natural events, and or from a county-wide level. We then take that information and we incorporate it into our safety element to ensure consistency between the two documents. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, staff is recommending that we hire PlaceWorks Incorporated to do all the work that we've mentioned tonight. The reason for this is there's many. First and foremost, I would like the council to know that PlaceWorks is the consultant team that prepared our current general plan. They assisted in updating our current housing element, which covers the years 2015 through the year 2022. In addition to that, they are currently preparing housing elements for all of the Solano County jurisdictions with the exception of one. I'll come back to the second to last bullet in just a moment. I also want to note that PlaceWorks is one of the known leaders in identifying and meeting the needs of what HCD expects to see in our environmental justice element. Now going back to the second to last bullet. So in September of 2020, the Solano Transportation Authority, which is a joint powers group consisting of Solano Transportation Authority, the county, and all 7 Solano County cities, issued a statement of qualifications request from different planning organizations to seek assistance in working with all the jurisdictions to work on the Housing Collaborative. The Housing Collaborative is essentially a group consisting of everyone within Solano County to do additional work that will help inform our housing elements, but this work will be done and prepared at a county level. This effort is being funded by the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, along with the Association of Bay Area Government. Initially, this was going to be a much smaller group than what it currently is. As of today, everyone within Solano County is a member of our Solano County Housing Collaborative. And if the city council members have looked into the draft housing element scope of work attached to your staff report, you will see specific tasks that are identified as joint documents. All those joint documents are being prepared as part of this collaborative and thus are being funded by MTC ABAG. So given PlaceWorks' knowledge of Solano County and more specifically of Vacaville, once we move forward with the preparation of these documents, as noted, the preparation of the housing element is quite complex with the passage of several housing bills, some of them just passing a few days ago. And it is imperative that we have a qualified professional group assist city staff in order to prepare these documents within a timely fashion. As of right now, it appears that the City Council will be reviewing our draft housing element in May of 2022. We do have to have our completed housing element submitted to HCD by January of 2023. And within 90 days of our submittal, we must have it certified by the state. Failure to have a certified housing element does come with consequences ranging from potential lawsuits to fines from the state. And in its worst scenario, it could result in the temporary loss of local control over housing development applications. That is to say, the city would have no discretionary review of housing applications until such time that we bring our housing element into compliance. Next slide, please. So as previously mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, we are requesting that the City Council authorize our city manager and or his designee to enter into a consultant contract with PlaceWorks to prepare all the documents reviewed tonight. The contract is not to exceed roughly $419,000. Of this amount, the city has been awarded 2 grants that total $333,236. Sorry, I said that wrong. Just under $334,000. These grants came from HCD as well as ABAG. These are the two jurisdictions that oversee the creation of housing elements. Given that we don't know whether or not the city will be required to zone additional lands for our housing allocation this year. We're not certain what our required CEQA environmental review will consist of. And therefore, we are requesting that the City Council authorize a contract, again, not to exceed just under $419,000. But we are requesting that we be able to use roughly $86,000 of community development funds to make up for the gap in our funding. This number does represent the creation of a supplemental EIR that would be done along with the housing element in the event that we do have to rezone additional properties to meet our housing arena. Next slide, please. So with that, staff does recommend that our City Council, by simple motion, authorize our city manager or his designee to enter into a consultant contract with PlaceWorks in an amount not to exceed $418,829 to prepare the housing element update, safety element, and environmental justice update. Next slide, please. So that does conclude my presentation. I would like to note that I do have Jennifer Gaston. She is a principal planner with PlaceWorks on the call, and she and I are available to answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We'll open public comment. Is anybody from public comment? I see no hands up. I'll close public comment and bring it back to the council. I have Councilmember Roberts. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the presentation. Just had some questions on the safety planning aspect of it. I know FEMA has recently done a bunch of updates to their guidelines for different emergency planning purposes. I think the local mitigation one's still been a while, but I know they've updated some of their checklists and requirements, not necessarily put in their guide yet. So are you guys making sure you're following the most current guidelines from FEMA regarding that plan? Maybe for.
I just want to ask a question for clarification. Are you asking a question in regards to our safety element or in regards to the local hazard mitigation plan?
Local hazard mitigation plan, which I'd assume would fall under as a piece of the safety. But yeah, for local hazard mitigation plan is primarily what I'm speaking on.
Excuse me, I'm just taking a look. If Chief Concepcion is on the call, I do believe he is one of the city staff members who is currently working on our Solano County Local Hazard Mitigation Plan. Perhaps he can answer that question.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the question.
Chief, I was just wondering if, just making sure that that the local hazard mitigation plan hadn't been updated with a lot of the other FEMA guidelines this year. I just want to make sure we're using the current guidelines from federal and state level.
Yes, we are. After your initial comment, a couple of city council meetings ago, I double checked with our staff and they checked with the county, and we're complying with everything that needs to be complied with.
Okay, yeah, just make sure because they made an absurd amount of adjustments to a lot of their planning guides this past like 6 months alone. So yeah, that's all I had. Thank you.
Okay, I'll entertain motion.
This is Mike Silva, motion to approve.
Thank you.
Sullivan, I'll second.
Thank you. Roll call vote, please.
Vice Mayor Sullivan,
Yes.
Councilmember Stockton,
Yes.
Councilmember Ritchie,
Yes.
Councilmember Silva,
Yes.
Councilmember Roberts,
Yes.
Councilmember Wiley,
Yes.
Mayor Rowlett.
Aye. Vice Mayor Sullivan, you've got the floor.
Thanks, sir. All right, we're moving on to item 9C, resolution approving a disposition development and loan agreement between the City of Vacaville and CFY Development, Inc. for development of rent-restricted apartment housing on city-owned property on Allison Drive.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Mayor. I'll turn it over to Emily Cantu, our Housing and Community Services Director, for the presentation.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Good evening, Vice Mayor and council members. Tonight, staff is recommending that the council approve, next slide, please, that the council does approve the disposition, development, and loan agreement for the development of 185 rent-restricted apartments on city-owned property on Allison Drive, plus 2 managers units. Before we get started, I would like to inform the council that staff has received comments from the public today regarding this item, including needing clarification on the potential loss of the $1.9 million STA sub-HIP grant, if that grant was being used to finance a private development, or if the grant was triggering the requirement to pay prevailing wage. Also, a request why the local carpenters union was called out in the DDLA, and a question about the rents being restricted at 80% or less of area median income versus lower income levels. The due diligence performed to address prior prevailing wage theft allegations, providing suggested provisions to ensure the city loans are paid back. Question regarding the approval process for disposition, development, and loan agreements. And finally, I want to thank the commenter for letting us know that there is a typographical error that I need to draw attention to the council of in section 1.1T, as in Tom, where the words say $84,000, but the number is $8,400. If the DDLA is approved this evening, that approval will include a correction to the words, which should say 8,400. Next slide, please. So some background on this project. The City Council has taken actions in 2019 and 20, including approving a zone change and policy plan amendment to apply a residential overlay to the city-owned property. That action was taken because these properties are in a prime location to include new multifamily dwelling units due to direct access to transit facilities and walking distance of retail, service, employment, and also the Ulatis Cultural Center, Performing Arts Center, and the Public Library. The council also approved an exclusive negotiating rights agreement between the city and CFY Development, which allowed staff to negotiate a disposition, development, and loan agreement, DDLA, exclusively with CFY to develop below market rate housing on a portion of the city's property. The remaining portion of the property is planned at this time for commercial retail uses in the future. CFY Development has extensive experience developing and managing affordable housing, including Kimmy's Place apartments here in Vacaville, which were completed back in 2015. The CFY team has almost 50 years experience with 64 developments and have received local, state, and national awards on many of their projects. Finally, the City Council also took action to approve a financing agreement for a $1.9 million grant from the Solano Transportation Authority as an incentive for this affordable housing project. Next slide, please. During the negotiating period, CFY conducted due diligence regarding the construction of 185 apartments to be available at below market rate rental amounts. The complex will include amenities such as playground, athletic court, bike corral, parking and storage, an outdoor lounge and barbecue area, and will also incorporate pedestrian paths to the adjacent Vacaville Transit Center to promote transit ridership. CFY invested their own funds to prepare and submit an application for project entitlements to the Community Development Department, and staff completed negotiation of terms of a DDLA. Next slide, please. That negotiated DDLA was considered by City Council in March earlier this year. At that time, City Council directed staff to work with the developer regarding a local hire preference, adding a senior component, the potential for steeper affordability, and requiring payment of prevailing wage. Subsequent closed session meetings with City Council resulted in staff investigating how the developer could incorporate a pre-apprenticeship program and asked that the developer commit to a partnership with the Vacaville High School construction trade program. Next slide. Staff and CFY completed discussion of all the requested items. The overall results of each item are included as attachment 2 of the staff report. Incorporating the agreed to changes, the key DDLA terms for consideration this evening include selling the portion of city land for fair market value, providing a $1.9 million redevelopment loan through reallocated Measure M funds offset by the STA grant. The project would include studio, 1 and 2 bedroom units. Rents would be restricted at or below 80% of area median income. This means rents would range from about, at that level, would range from about $1,359 to $1,746. And the financing for the project would include the city loan, federal and state tax credit equity, tax exempt bonds, a deferred developer fee, and state affordable housing sources. All the development costs are the responsibility of the developer, and the city contribution is only a below market rate loan for the land and the $1.9 million loan offset by the STA grant. Next slide. Some additional DDLA terms are the developer's obligation to restrict rents for 55 years, contact local subcontractors, work with the carpenters union, conduct robust advertising to obtain local bids. Of course, they need to manage and maintain properly the project throughout the 55-year term, and partner with the high school construction trade program. Finally, to ensure labors for the project are paid timely, subcontractors need to allow city staff to conduct random inspections and interviews with the workers on site, hang a large banner so workers know they can contact the city if they have not been paid, and provide documentation requested by the city that workers are being paid. Next slide. So I know Tyra in the prior item was talking about the regional housing need allocation, or RHNA. This chart shows the current RHNA goal in our current housing element, the 2015 to 2023 housing element. As the council is aware, the city's tools to incentivize below market rate housing development is limited. If the DDLA is approved this evening, when the project is successfully completed, the city will be able to report to the state that its RHNA requirement for low-income housing has been met in its entirety. This goal can be met through only the small loan of $1.9 million. That was offset with the STA grant. And I say small loan in comparison to the overall project cost, and providing the land. That loan will be paid back and will be for the fair market value of the property. Additionally, I want to mention that in addition to meeting the RHNA goal, there's a vacancy rate in below market apartments in Vacaville of less than 1%. So I can say that this development would provide a housing product that is very much needed in the community. Next slide. In order to enter into the DDLA to sell the property, certain findings have been made. They're listed on the slide. The DDLA approval does not approve the project itself, which is subject to all applicable state and local laws and regulations, including one or more hearings before the Planning Commission. And tonight, staff is recommending approval of the DDLA and authorizing the city manager or his designee to finalize the documents and execute all the necessary documents to implement the DDLA. Next slide. With that, I am happy to answer any questions you may have. And we have a representative of CFY Development, John Cicerone, here as well to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Cantu. Great presentation. I really appreciate it. We'll open it up for public comment. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak?
Chris Palomo, I'll open your mic.
Mr. Palomo, you're on.
Yes, good evening. First,
Good
I'd like to say thank you for standing up against CFY the last time they presented DDLA to the council. My name is Christopher Palomo. I've been a resident of Vacaville for roughly 18 years, with my family that has resided in Vacaville for 25 plus years. I'm calling in tonight as a carpenter that has worked 9 years in the trades and calling against the CFY development. We have heard from prior meetings the issues with CFY. I'm asking council, staff, and the residents not to forget about the men and the women in construction that are building the project so we all have a place to work and a place to live. We should expect better in our great city and show workers that they are a priority to that of Vacaville and have higher standards by saying no to the CFY and the Allison Apartments development. Let's not forget the hefty penalties that were assessed to CFY, which were on a prevailing wage project. Please vote no on the new DDLA again, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Palomo. I appreciate it. I want to remind folks, you guys have 3 minutes. We'll time you and I'll give you a prompt when you're getting close. Next caller, please.
Marian Elkins, I'll open your mic.
Yeah, hi. I just have a question, a couple of questions. My assumption is this entire project is geared toward low income, correct? And I'm wondering if it is, why does the language say a plan to construct up to 185 apartments? Why do we not have a solid number? It will be 185, it'll be 180. Why is there not a solid number?
Are those your only 2 questions, ma'am?
Yes, except I do want to comment that my concern is I don't want what happened before to happen again. We need this in Vacaville. We need restricted rent. And it can't turn into something where they later down the line say, oh, but we can't afford to rent at that price. We can't afford to build this at that price. You know, it needs to stay like it's presented.
Thank you, ma'am. Emily, can you respond to those 2 questions?
Yes, I'd be happy to. Thank you for the opportunity. Yes, the project is geared towards low income. So the city agreements would require the rents to be restricted to households that make no more than 80% of the area median income. And that would be for a 55-year time period. And why up to 185? I appreciate that question. And I think I would like to work with the developer and see if we can pin that number down more solidly as you suggested.
Thank you very much. We'll take the next caller, Miss Alicia Minion.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Great. So I'm asking the council vote no on this item for several reasons, and then I have some questions. So one, this project's DDLA states units will rent as high as 80% of the area median income. 80% is the highest end of the lower income range, and it also falls within the moderate income range. And the affordable housing projects that we have currently in the city, the max is 60% of the area median income. And in fact, the projects like at Eden Housing on South Orchard is proposed to house homeless. The Pony Express Senior Housing on Elmira is also going to house homeless. And so people making the 80% of the area median income, these are people that can already afford to put a roof over their head. So I really think we need to accommodate those people who really need housing at this site. In addition, even though the developer will pay or will charge rent to tenants making 80% of the area median income, the city appears to be providing more public funding than the other affordable housing projects. So there's more money with regard to the preferential loans. In addition, this particular project is receiving $1.9 million in federal highway funds, which is known as the SubHIP grant. And Fairfield, they received $2.1 million in federal highway funds, and they built 190 units where about half the units are rented to tenants making 50% of the area median income, and the rest are being rented to tenants making 70% of the area median income. So this agreement that we have, it is completely silent with regard to how many units will be charged or will be allocated to tenants within a specific area median income. And this should not be approved without that type of information. In addition, I just think it looks suspicious that this project, which will rent to tenants making the higher incomes of any other affordable housing project in the city, it just happens to reside next to our most expensive luxury rentals, and that's Strata and the Harbison townhomes. So I'd like the city to explain why it is they're willing to sell this site and require this higher income, but the city was willing to sell its own land in other areas that appear to be less desirable to those projects that actually housed poor people, which is what we need. In addition, your first caller raised the question about local labor and prevailing wage. And because this project is receiving federal highway funds, and I want to say it's directly or indirectly, federal highway funds, this project may require prevailing wage under the Federal Department of Labor laws. I want to know if the city has consulted with the Department of Labor. And then lastly—
Ma'am, you're right at 3 minutes. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Emily, can you respond to those questions?
Yes, thank you. Let's see. I think as far as the direct question about prevailing wage, the federal funds through the STA grant are not being provided directly or indirectly to the project. The project will be receiving, if approved, Measure M funds. It is currently intended that the project does not require prevailing wage. However, if prevailing wage are triggered by any other funding source or any other requirement, prevailing wage will be required, and the developer must follow proper labor code regulations and laws. I believe there was some concern about the 80% area median income and that it was high. I would like to mention, moderate income is 120% of area median income, so it is a separate category. The 80% area median income in the city documents allows some financing flexibility to the developer. However, currently the plan of the developer is to access state financing that will provide 30% area median income units, 50% area median income units, 60% area median income units, as well as 80%. So it is likely, should the DDLA be approved, that a variety of needed rent restricted units will be available at various levels to the community. A question about preferential loans, and perhaps this project is receiving more than other affordable housing projects. I would mention the Oak Grove project that is currently proposed, has a loan amount of $2.5 million, which is, a little less than this or equitable with the land and the loan size. And I I believe I touched on everything. I hope so.
I think there was one question, Emily, about how this site was picked or how we came up with this particular site. Do you have a comment on that?
Thank you. Thanks for the reminder. I missed that piece. Thanks. Yeah, I would say it's because the city owns this site. And again, as I mentioned in the presentation, the council felt it was an ideal spot for new multifamily housing because it is by the transit center and the Ulatis Community Center and all those amenities, retail and services. And because we have the land, it's a great way to incentivize development of affordable housing that is so very needed in the community.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the responses and thank you, ma'am, for your questions. We'll move on to Wendy Brecken, our next caller.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I'm calling about the process. I'm asking that this item be tabled until the development agreement portion of the DDLA can be reviewed by the Planning Commission. The DDLA includes a comprehensive development agreement that talks about pre-development construction, CEQA, changes to construction plans, commencement of construction, EEO, compliance with laws during construction, indemnity, quarterly progress reports, inspections, liens, the things that are in a development agreement. And the Vacaville Municipal Code 14.17.210.060 says that the Planning Commission is authorized to make recommendations to the City Council to approve or deny development agreements. So in this case, this item has not gone to the Planning Commission. While it is arguable that, you know, a portion of this agreement should not maybe go to the Planning Commission, at least a development agreement portion of it should. The plain meaning of the Vacaville Municipal Code is that the City Council doesn't have authority to approve this or approve this yet until there is a recommendation by the City Council. So again, I'm asking that this be tabled, and that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. City Attorney or City Manager, can you speak to the order question with the Planning Commission?
Actually, Vice Mayor, Emily has a response for that, I believe.
Thank you.
Yes, I'd be happy to address that. This is Emily. And the commenter is correct that development agreements fall under the purview of the Planning Commission for recommendation to the City Council, and that's required by statute. Our development agreements are agreements between the city and a private property owner that wishes to develop their private property. And it's valid for a specific time period and vests certain rights and obligations for that property for that time period. DDLAs, disposition, development, and loan agreements, on the other hand, are not under the purview of the Planning Commission for recommendation to City Council under statute because they do not vest any specific development rights. The DDLA describes the terms and conditions of the sale of city-owned property. So again, I mentioned in my presentation, I'll mention it again, that the project itself is subject to all applicable state and local laws and regulations, and one or more hearings of the Planning Commission. So the project will be before the Planning Commission.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And thank you for the question, ma'am. We will move to our next and last commenter, it looks like, Mr. James Kendall.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Good evening, City Council and staff. My name is James Kendall. I'm here as representative from Carpenter's Local 180 covering Solano County. Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. I am asking the council to vote no on the DDLA with CFY development. Several concerning issues were brought up last time the DDLA was presented to this body. I would like to thank the council for doing the right thing by voting against approving the DDLA. While CFY, the state's previous issues were related to a subcontractor, it was still their responsibility to monitor the project and not turn a blind eye to problems. Previously, it was brought to your attention with supporting documents presented to the council showing workers were awarded $2.5 million in back wages and penalties. It should be mentioned this amount was negotiated down, not by the workers, but by CFY and DIR. Workers had no say. They were shorted wages not once, but twice. That process took years. At the last meeting CFY attended, they like to boast about their awards, including the last project they built in Vacaville. Where's the mention of the penalties they received on that project in Vacaville? They like to paint a pretty picture, but we need to look behind the canvas and see what's going on. Council, staff, and residents, I'm asking you to stand for better standards in the city of Vacaville. Please vote no on approving the DDLA with CFY in the city and show that workers building our city is and will always be a priority. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate the comment. So we're going to close public comment unless there's any more commenters. Last call for public comment. Okay, we're going to close public comment and we will move it over to City Council. City Council, do you have comments or questions? Looks like we've got Councilmember Wiley.
Thank you. I have one question. Just a few minutes ago, we heard that the moderate income was 120%, but isn't it a range that begins at 80 and goes from 80 to 120%? So if it's below 80, it's like just under the moderate income is my first question. And then the other question was about in the information it talked about the carpenters union, and it doesn't make any mention of any other unions. And we do have several other unions in town that are also, have great union halls and things like that, like the plumbers and the steam fitters and the IBEW. And so I was just wondering, why was the carpenters union singled out?
This is Emily. Thank you for the question, Councilmember Wiley. Regarding the ranges of income limits, the low income at 80%. Some people also look at 100%, which is the median income. And then after that, people look at the moderate income at 120%. So I think you said it exactly right, that anything above 80% and up to 120% could be considered the moderate income, but 80% or below would be considered low income. So hopefully that answered your question. And then as far as the carpenters union, the provision related to the hire of local labor were just specifically negotiated with the developer to address input received from the council and the public. And it was related to the desire to require the use of local labor. So that's how that provision came about. It was discussing and negotiating and an agreement with the developer. They may be able and interested in including other groups as well and reaching out to them for bids. I would defer to Mr. Cicerone on that one.
Thank you.
Councilmember Silva.
There we go. Thanks for the presentation. Appreciate all the public feedback. I'm gonna, one of the issues is, making sure that we pay, prevailing wages, or livable wages, for our workers. Something that we discussed as a council, and I'm gonna honor that discussion. One thing that I'd like to get answered and hopefully addressed tonight is from I guess we'll be managing it, is will there be any incentives for certain workforce? And just let me elaborate real more. If we're talking about 80%, a lot of times that's, there's still a lot of working professionals that are out there making those incomes. So are there any incentives that there can be provided for working professionals? for specifically those who are working with like in our school district. I know that sometimes there's incentives for public safety and military. I'd like to see those options available as well. I'd like to see if we can get some comments on that.
Thank you for your comments, Councilmember Silva. I appreciate the questions. And again, I hope the developer is able to unmute his line. I know he was on here. Yeah, he is. He's got his hand up. Crystal, perhaps you can.
He's unmuted.
Okay, thank you.
Emily, thank you. This is John Cicerone speaking. Is it appropriate for me to address the council?
Yes.
Thank you. Before I address Mr. Councilmember Silva's question about incentive for workforce, I'd like to touch on a couple of the comments made by the public. With regards to the prevailing wage issue on a prior project in Sacramento, I'd like to clarify that we weren't penalized and we received no penalties in that, and that the $700,000 was something that we did because we acknowledged that as the prime contractor, developer, and builder, it was our responsibility for the payment of any underpayment of the wages by our subcontractors. And we did have a whole series of labor compliance programs in place during the full 2 years that that project was built, and the underpayment of the wages wasn't brought to us till after the project was completed. And DIR recognized that. I think because of all the labor compliance programs that we had in place, there were no penalties assessed against us at all. I know that Mr. Kindle referred to some violations in prior construction that we had in Vacaville, and I think he must be referring to Kimmy's Place. I don't recall any on Rocky Hill, and I do remember Kimmy's only because we almost never get any type of complaints or violations. I think we've built over $500 million worth of affordable housing at this point, and I think on Kimmy's Place, there was a minor OSHA violation dealing with a safety railing that was immediately corrected. I don't remember exactly what it was, maybe $1,000 or something like that. So I just want to let the council know that with regards to the prevailing wage issue on Hardin, I think Martin Luther King once had a phrase that it's never too late to do what's right. And that's really what we did with regards to 700. I know in terms of affordability, what I'd like to do is address the council with regards to where we are in the process of developing affordable housing and how hard it is to do in the state of California. And what the DDA represents is a framework. And it's a framework where we're going to be filling in, dotting the I's and crossing the T's as we move down the process. And it's what starts the process. And there's a lot of language in here that deals with 80% or lower. The reason for that is that the actual programs that we're going to use to finance the project have not yet been defined. Most of the 2022 financing is not publicly available yet, and we don't quite know what the amounts and the levels will be, and they come with limitations. I would hope that Cal HFA and CIDLAC, when they do publish their 2022 financing programs, I would hope that they'd make about $200 million in state credit available and about $100 million in GAP soft loans. And those GAP soft loans would come through the Cal HFA mixed income program. And they did something similar to that in 2021. And so when we were before you back in March, that's what we had, was a program that was tailored to those programs. And that's why when the document is a little bit vague and says 80% of or lower, it's because until those parameters are published, we don't know exactly how we have to target, craft a winning application. The same thing applies to the number of units. that when I do go before the Planning Commission, I will ask for flexibility in their recommendations to permit me to adjust the number of units. And it's not with our intention to significantly reduce the number of units in the building. It's to craft an application that will win the super competitive tax credits that we need to finance a project like this. I'd also like to address the 55-year term on this and where that comes from. And that comes from the low-income housing tax credit program, which will be the bedrock from which we will leverage the other financing sources. It's a regulatory agreement that gets recorded against the project. The Cal HFA financing will somewhat parallel that, and they have their own regulatory agreements, and they also have their own note restrictions. And so the terms that you see in this document, reflecting the term of the DDA, the term of the promissory note, all that comes together as these other sources are finalized, such that they're all coterminous, and the document that you have in front of you, again, is flexible because it's the framework that we need so that we can bring all this together at the close. So having addressed that in the big picture, I do know that we have no objection to doing prevailing wage or non-prevailing wage. The issue with prevailing wage, of course, are the sources and the resources that we have available. And given the resources that we have available, it's clearly our preference to focus on a non-prevailing wage project, that there would be a very large gap which would be created by the increased cost associated with the prevailing wage. I think having talked about the overall framework, I'd like to come back to Council Members Silva's question about incentive for workforce. And there are a series of fair housing laws that we have to deal with. And my biggest concern would be violating any of the fair housing laws if you start in some way or another incentivizing particular elements of the workforce. I know that we do artist housing as an example, and that's because there's an IRS exemption for it. So as I sit here tonight, I'm not certain how I could incentivize and do it and still be within a framework of fair housing. And I think that concludes my response to the question. Thank you, and excuse me if I was a little long-winded.
Mr. Cicerone.
So, can I ask a follow-up question?
Please.
So on the last note on incentivizes, in your experience, is there any anything against maybe reducing security deposits or items such as that?
It's pretty typical on the security deposits to do a first month, and that's typically never much of an issue given the rents that we have. And I wouldn't know how to do that with one particular demographic without disadvantaging another. There are certain incentives that we provide. For instance, I do artist housing. I've got a wonderful project in downtown Sacramento, our warehouse artist loft that's won national awards. And I'm opening up another artist project in Truckee. And I do incentivize for artists in those projects, but I'm able to do so because there's an exemption in the federal code that permits that.
All right. At a future time, as city manager, can someone please update me on more about the legality of incentivizations and what developers or management companies are allowed to do?
Mr. Silva, this is Vice Mayor. Did you have a particular occupation or profession in mind, or are you just curious in general?
Well, so the ones I mentioned were public safety, military, and our school staff, our educators throughout our city, including the support staff.
This is Emily, Councilmember Silva. Yeah, I'd be happy to look into that for you and get you that information that you're requesting.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Councilmember Silva. So I don't see any other hands from council, but I do have a whole series of questions that I want to ask. So Emily, I'll just ask these, I'll just ask a question, you can answer it, and I'll just keep going. I've got probably 5 or 6. So what is the approximate value of the land that we're selling? What's the sales price?
The sales price will be determined based on an appraisal to determine the fair market value at a future date so that it's current.
Okay.
It's approximately 1.88 million was a current rough estimate, but it will be finalized later to be the current fair market value.
And I assume council will have to approve that transaction when the appraisal is done?
No, that would not need to come back because the DDLA is written that the loan will be for the current fair market value.
Okay. And so that follows up my second question. So the loan proceeds, the 1.9 million and the sale of the property will then be repaid essentially over this 55-year period of time. So we're looking at somewhere between 4 and 6 million that'll be repaid over the 55 years. Is that correct?
No, I don't have an amortization schedule in front of me. I apologize for that.
Well, we'll just say without interest. I mean, so we have the 1.9 million and then whatever the sale price would be, probably around 4, I'm guessing.
Yes.
Is that an accurate assessment?
Yes,
so,
sir.
55 years, I'll be dead. Is there a way to speed that period of time up? Can we recoup those funds quicker? Obviously, those are going back to the city's housing fund. We could definitely use that. I'm guessing there may be some state regulations or requirements that preclude that. And I also see Mr. Cicerone's hand up. Can you or Mr. Cicerone answer that follow-up question?
Yeah, as far as the term of the loan, it's 55 years in order to match the regulatory agreement, which is needed by the developer for accessing the other funding sources. So the way it's currently set up is that there will be an annual payment made, and depending on really the revenue of the property would determine how much the city payment would be. And also I wanted to mention there is their developer can prepay the loan at any time. So it's not limited to paying over 55 years, but that is the full term that's allowed. But depending on those annual repayment amounts, it could be paid sooner.
Do we have the legal ability to say we want it paid in 10 years or 20 or 30, or is it 55 is the max and then prepay as you can is the law of the land?
Yeah, I don't think the developer would be able to access the other financing with the shorter loan term.
Okay. And I do see his hand up. You want him to add on to, you want to give him a chance to jump in?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Mr. Cicerone, would you like to add to that?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. I'd like to point out first off that the city loans are secured by the land. You are a secured creditor. And if there's ever a disposition, refinancing of the property, those loans would have to be addressed. So this is no different from somebody's mortgage on their house and the power that goes with that. Secondly, to follow up on what Emily said, we have other financing sources that we're turning to, and it is the requirements of those which are driving the term on this loan. And the term of the actual note itself in the debt is the earlier of the repayment of the Cal HFA loan or the termination of the DDA. And it's really that Cal HFA MIP loan, which is what's driving the term of the city loan. And that's the financing that we need this loan to be coterminous with. And my final comment is what Emily pointed out, that if in fact the project does better than what we were envisioning, and if there are higher rents and we're better at controlling our costs, there's a good chance that the loans could pay off faster than indicated. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, sir. And I have a couple more questions, and Mr. Cicerone, you'll probably have to jump in on 1 or 2 of these as well. So my next question is, so from what I understand, the simple way to understand the rental rates is that folks, as long as they're under set income thresholds of the AGI, will pay 30% of their income towards the rent. Is that a fair big picture understanding of the rental process? Mr. Cicero, go ahead.
Thanks. No, I think that what you're thinking of more describes housing community development voucher programs.
Okay.
And under this program, which we're envisioning, under our preliminary financing plan, because it may ultimately be we do use HCD, but right now that's not the plan. We're envisioning a 4% tax credit, and the 4% bond program, which we're envisioning, uses rents that are set by the California Tax Credit Allocation Committee.
Okay.
And every year they publish a schedule that shows the maximum rents and the maximum incomes for each household to qualify for those rents.
Gotcha.
So I'm suggesting right now, under our preliminary financing plan, that 10% of the units be at 30% AMI, 10% of the units be at 50%, 70% of the units be at 60%, and there's another 10% at 80%.
Okay.
And tax credit would then, in 2022, publish their rent schedule. And from that, there's a utility allowance which is deducted. And then that amount, that net amount, is the tenant paid rent.
So I think, so that's very helpful. And if it would be great if you could send that, the rental schedule to Emily to share with us that you mentioned earlier. But you're diving right into my next question, which I really appreciate. So you mentioned earlier in the call about the phase in the process we're in, right? And you kind of talked a little bit about how this process works and where we're at specifically. My next question was going to be, what exactly is the allocation mix going to be? And you just gave us a really good starting point. So if the council would like to make suggested edits to that mix, for example, I'm looking at Fairfield's now. Fairfield has a very similar project that uses similar financing. When would be the opportunity for us? I know you probably have to run it by your financiers, come back to the city and kind of go back and forth. At what point in time could we say, hey, we'd like to see a 5% bump to the base, a 5% bump to the step 2, and then, reduce the 70 by 10% and keep the rest the same? Or where does council have the ability to negotiate that a little bit? I think this is the area that I'm most interested in because it, this is one of our biggest pieces of property. This is a really big asset to the community. And I think for the city to move forward with this, we have to show some significant value to residents. And so obviously, if the project was all at 80%, it's a little less lucrative, but I do really appreciate the scale you just pointed out. At what point in the process do we have the ability to comment on those steps? And you're welcome to respond back if you've got the answer.
Thank you. And it's an incredibly insightful question, and thank you for raising it. The way the document is set up is there's a schedule of performance. And I cannot stress to the council how competitive and how difficult it is to finance affordable housing. And when you craft the applications that reach out into the various pools of financing, you're trying to do it in such a way that you win the competitions. And it's no different from any other person who tries to build and develop affordable housing. And that affordability mix plays into a project's competitiveness. And so very often when you deeper target a project, you may very well not only make it require more financial resources by reducing rent, but you may make it less competitive in the tax credit process. So the answer in terms of timing is that the DDA has a schedule of performance, and in the schedule of performance, I have to submit a financing plan, and the city has to approve that financing plan. And that's done at the staff level. And it is during that financing submittal where those nuances in the AMIs and the actual allocations are set. And then once those are approved, we then make our financing applications to the various agencies. So staff would be seeing our final financing plans probably about a month or so before the actual SIDLAC bond application. There will be draft and preliminary numbers prior to that, because the program that we envision using, the Cal HFA mixed income program, has an application cycle, which is another 60, 90 days prior to the SIDLAC. So in terms of timing, once we understand the state agency application deadlines, we work backwards from that. And the city would be seeing our financing plans probably, again, depending on the schedules, somewhere in that 60 to 120 day prior to the application deadlines.
Got it. Okay, so this is probably one of the most important details for me, and this might be a comment for Emily, I guess. I think the council on this project over the last couple of iterations and discussions, we've asked for quite a few things, prevailing wage being probably the key thing, and we couldn't get it, right? It wouldn't pencil. And so that's a huge blow to some of us on council who really were looking forward to those living wage jobs in addition to the housing project. So I guess my concern is if we just kind of go off on our merry way tonight and approve, and it comes back with, a very meager percentage at that 30 level and at that, I guess, below 50% level, and we're really top heavy, I really don't know if the juice is worth the squeeze. And again, I don't mean anything personal by that or you've been a good, very creative partner and willing to work on us with a variety of issues. We've just had some very recent history where developers have promised us things that we were really excited about. And then once the ship had sailed, they pulled the rug out from under our feet and changed the plan and changed the allocation. For me, we're making a pretty sizable commitment tonight, if we move forward with this. And we've also been told that we can't do prevailing wage. So I've really got to see a deep discount in the AGI for our folks. And so this question might be more for Emily. As Mr. Cicerone submits his financing plan back to you, I'd really like another bite at the apple or chance to take a look at it. I don't know if that's customary to come back to council, but I'm going to be very frustrated if it comes in a place that I'm not expecting. And, tonight was okay, but I think we could do a little better. So Emily, where do you see council being involved in that process or not? Or are we just out after tonight's vote?
To answer your question, the way the agreement is set up now, the final financing plan would be reviewed and considered by the city manager or his designee. And that final financing plan is not planned to come back to city council. I'm sure the developer and I are more than happy and willing to pursue the current funding that's coming available soon that would secure those lower income levels for this project in particular. That's, certainly a desire I understand from the council, a need in the community, and a desire of the developer to access that funding. So those are kind of my comments. It would not come back at this point. It would be with staff and the city manager.
So I guess for the city manager, then, and I can't speak for the other council members, but I do feel like we're making a sizable commitment if we move forward with this tonight. And I feel like there were some major concessions that we just couldn't get because of the pricing aspect and because of the limited financial options in Vacaville and some past council's decisions. Again, I feel like we're making a pretty big sacrifice here, and I would appreciate maybe being filled in if you're comfortable with that. And also, I hope you're sort of reading what I'm putting down in the sense that we want to see a significant change in low income housing for Vacaville residents, and we're really hoping this project will make that impact. And I guess I'm being kind of unclear here, but I think you probably understand what I'm saying. I have two last comments, I guess, and then I'll turn it over to Ms. Wiley. Sorry, Jeanette, I know I'm going long. My next comment is on the subcontractor wage discrepancy piece. So council has heard quite a bit of that. I think a few of us have spoken with some of the folks from the different trades groups. Mr. Cicerone, you've provided some explanations as to what happened and kind of how that did happen. It's hard to tell sometimes when you're a council member and you're in between two different parties, right? There's two stories and you never know. And in Vacaville, we do value our workforce and want to make sure our workers are taken care of. And so I guess, Emily, my question to you is, I did appreciate the pieces, the signage, the different various pieces. There was one last bullet point that was sort of vague. It talked about a recording requirement to the city. Can you give me some more details on that? The frequency, how does that work? Or what are we looking at? And maybe it's too early in the process, but I want some teeth, if you will, on that requirement. And again, Mr. Cicero, no insult intended. It's just, as a council, we've been notified there may have been past issues, and I just think we need to be diligent and cross all our T's and dot our I's. So, Emily, do you have any detail on that? It was on slide 9. It was the bottom bullet point.
Yes, Vice Mayor, thank you for bringing up the requirement on the subcontractors to submit documentation that the workers are being paid. So the disposition and development and loan agreement does not specifically spell out processes for implementing the agreed to terms necessarily. So that would be done by staff. So we can request documentation weekly or biweekly, monthly, as we determine appropriate.
Okay.
I would mention, we are putting these provisions in to ensure laborers are paid timely. The prevailing wage and any issues with the Department of Industrial Relations as the project stands at this moment would not be applicable because it's not a prevailing wage project.
Right. No, I understand.
Yeah, we do want to make sure that everyone is paid.
And will you at least be informing council on what that schedule is that you agree upon at some point in time, maybe informally, or can you bring that back to us in an email or something?
Absolutely.
Okay, my last comment, I guess, is really just a due diligence research question. We had one of the public commenters talking about prevailing wage potentially being triggered by the federal highway grants. I just would hate to get, down to the 7th inning here if the council does try to approve this tonight, and all of a sudden we figure out, oh, we made a mistake. So I'm hoping staff can double, triple check that particular question and just make sure that what we assume is the case, so there's no surprises later. And then my last comment, I think, being on council for the last couple of years, especially in Vacaville, where we've had really limited tools to build low-income housing, and we're finally starting to have that discussion, finally starting to build kind of the financing and the equipment that we need in our city to really support our low to moderate income residents. It's been really hard to build low-income housing in general. We just have almost no resources other than really free land and sometimes some grants. And so I know I've probably been sort of critical about this project and a little hard-nosed on it, but I do want to say that the fact that we are eradicating, I don't know if that's the correct term, I guess meeting our RHNA numbers is really exciting. I think that's been a tremendous challenge the last 4 years for us, and that's something to celebrate. And so kudos to staff on that if we do move forward with this tonight. And again, it's not maybe the lowest income housing that I'd like, but it's actually better than I thought it was before we had this meeting tonight at the 80% level. We're going to be making a huge dent in those RHNA numbers, but at the end of the day, we're providing housing for families and for seniors and for people that need that housing. It's extremely difficult though, because we're balancing that on the back of maybe sacrificing living wage jobs. And so that prevailing wage trade-off is extremely difficult. And depending on how this goes tonight, it's just a really tough vote. So that's my last comment. Emily, I really appreciate all of your time today. I appreciate all of your answering my questions. You've been very helpful. I'm going to turn it over to Councilmember Wiley.
Well, thank you, Vice Mayor, for your comments. And my comment is really kind of very related. The fact of the matter that these apartments are going to be built right next to the strata and right next to those luxury townhouses, which were not supposed to be luxury townhouses, but were supposed to be senior apartments, makes me a little uneasy about saying this is what the plan is going to be, and then somehow coming down later to say, oh, well, that's really not the way it worked out because we didn't get that loan. So now, they're all going to be at 80% or not. I just want some sort of assurance that the same change that happened to the senior apartments and the pressure of having high dollar apartments right down the street would not derail this project after we, have gone back and forth about it. And I have the same concern for the workers who then would qualify for affordable housing because we're not paying them prevailing wage.
Emily, do you want to speak to that at all, or Mr. Cicerone, do you have any response to that?
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Wiley. What I would say regarding the assurances is that regardless of what happens moving forward, this DDLA will require that the rents of this apartment complex will be set at no more than 80% for 55 years. That's the absolute maximum it could ever be. And that component of the agreement would not, be at the decision of the developer. If a change in that income limit was requested, that would come back to the council.
Mr. Cicerone, do you have your hand up? Would you like to speak to that?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the insightful question about change in the affordability mix of the project. And once the city approves the financing plan, that's not going to happen. And it's not going to happen because the city has to approve the financing plan for the various state agencies that we're going to apply to. And we can't apply to those agencies without the city's approval. That's why we're here tonight. So once you approve the financing plan, that's it. That's my affordability. And that's what the different agencies are going to approve. And if I'm successful in the competitions, that's what I'll develop. Now, what typically happens is that you may not always win the financing that you want the first go around, and you have to recharacterize the financing mix, in which case we would come back with an updated financing plan. The city would approve it, and then we would move forward with that. So I think the council members' concern about us changing affordability once it's been agreed to by the city won't happen. It just can't happen. And the DDA has the appropriate channels to ensure that. I didn't want to get into tax credit innuendos in detail, but I'd like to explain where this 80% came from. And I know there was a comment earlier in the public about how other cities had maximum 60% AMIs and why are we at 80? Well, the answer for that is that there was a change in the federal tax credit regulations. And it used to be that you had to do 60% of the 40% of the units at 60%, and 60 at 40 and 20 at 50. And those were the only two set-asides that you could apply for the federal tax credits. And the recent federal law changes enabled what they call average income set-asides. And under the average income, what they did different is they permitted a project to go up to 80%, in addition to other restrictions on other units. But the overall average AMI for the building has to be 60% or less. And you will see in affordable housing, most of the new projects taking advantage of that. And the simple reason for it is that even though we can still deep target down to the 30% like we're going to do, we can enhance our revenue by going into the 80%. And that enables us to put more debt that after the tax credits, the second biggest component of our capital structure are the tax exempt permanent bonds. It enables us to get more bonds, which in turn reduces the kind of subsidies that we need from the city and other agencies to make the project viable. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate the comments and the information. I don't see any more council member comments or hands up. I think we're ready for a motion. Do I have a motion?
This is Silva. A motion to approve. Thank you.
We've got a motion on the floor. Do we have a second?
Mr. Roberts, I'll second.
Got a motion and a second. Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Stockton?
Yes.
Councilmember Ritchie?
Yes.
Councilmember Silva?
Yes. Yes.
Councilmember Roberts?
Yes.
Councilmember Wiley?
No.
Vice Mayor Sullivan?
I go yes.
Okay.
Motion carries. Do I need to read anything off, Michelle, or is that okay?
And we're good to go.
Okay, thank you very much. So we're going to move on to item 9D. Chief Concepcion is going to do a COVID-19 and Assembly Bill AB 361 update. Chief, are you with us?
I am. Do we need the mayor to come back, or do you want me to go ahead?
I'm going to go through the whole, he's gone for the evening, or
Oh,
he's
gotcha. Okay.
open session. Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. Good evening, Vice Mayor and council members. Tonight, I'm going to give you a quick update on COVID-19, and actually we have some decent news, and then also give you an update on Assembly Bill 361. Next slide, please, Crystal. So as far as the numbers are concerned, California is approaching 4.5 million cases. There's been an additional of 303,582 cases from 2 weeks ago at our last council meeting. 68,387 deaths, which is an additional 1,574 from 2 weeks ago. And then the seven-day positivity, I'm happy to report, is going down from its peak in mid-August. It's at 2.5%, down 0.4% from this number is from 1 week ago. In Solano County, 43,983 cases, an addition of 1,169 from 2 weeks ago. 412 active cases, so that's 176 fewer active cases than we had 2 weeks ago, which is good news. Also good news is that we've got 61 hospitalized as opposed to 93 2 weeks ago, so that number is coming down also. There have been an additional 14 deaths in the last 2 weeks at 294. And the 7-day positivity is also coming down here in Solano County. It's at, as reported by the state, the number as reported by the county is a little bit higher, but the number reported by the state is at 2.7%, which is 0.6% lower. In Vacaville, we're at 11,587 cases, which is an addition of 324 cases in the last 2 weeks. Next slide, please, Crystal. Good news in the state, and as far as California is concerned, we continue to have the lowest number of COVID rates in the United States, which is good news. Cases continue to drop from the August peak, and you can really see that peak on the graphs that are available. And then, as I've also mentioned, the number of hospitalized in Solano County continue to drop, so hopefully we'll keep that trend going. ICU bed availability, when I last reported, was at 19%. Now we're at 24%. Still not a good number, but trending in the right direction. And let's hope that it keeps trending in that direction. In Vacaville, some of our staff continue to work remotely, but I'm happy to report that all essential services are still being provided to the residents as far as the city is concerned. Next slide, please. I want to give you a quick update on Assembly Bill or AB 361. It's an urgency measure that suspends the Brown Act requirements and authorizes remote meetings after the original September 30th, 2021 date as before. There's a couple of requirements that go along with it. Number one is it must be a state of emergency as proclaimed by the governor, which is the case right now. And one of the following two, the state or local officials have imposed or recommended measures to promote social distancing, which I want to remind you that there is no such mandate or recommendation in the county, so we don't have that. So the other thing that has to be in place is the legislative body, or in this case, the city council, finds that holding in-person meetings would present imminent risk to the health and safety of attendees. If you do make that finding, and which means that we continue with the remote meetings, those findings have to be renewed every 30 days in order to continue the remote meeting. Next Tuesday, October 5th, 2021, there's going to be a special council meeting to receive information on potential health and safety risks of meeting in person and consider whether or not the public meetings in the city are going to continue to be remote or be returned in person. And that concludes my presentation, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Chief. I really appreciate the comments. We do have one public comment, and I want to remind the caller that we have a 3-minute cap. Phone number in 724. You should be unmuted now. Nope, not quite. There you go. You're unmuted.
Sorry, Mayor and Council and public. I don't want to be interrupting your order of business at this meeting. This is Roberto Valdez, longtime resident. But I just need to know when, and I don't think I heard you say during the meeting today that where I could make a comment that is on something that is not in your agenda today. So tell me when I can do it.
Mr. Valdez, that was the very start of the meeting. We did miss that item. Since you're already speaking, though, I'll give you a chance to go ahead and make a comment. We just might not have staff on to respond to you, but if you want to make your comment,
Okay.
Go ahead.
That's fair, and thank you for doing that. I'm sorry if I sound like I'm interrupting again. But anyway, what I want to say to you is the reason I called tonight was because I am very concerned about what I have been observing for the past 2 weeks over at Lagoon Valley, that the pre-construction activities are having number one on the Lagoon Valley itself, number two on Lagoon Valley Park, number three is the lake, and number four the wildlife, as well as waterfowl there that pretty much seems to be congregated or right now is trying to survive in the adjacent pond to the lake. You know, what I am concerned is that I see a lot of disruption of the natural environment there to accommodate this project that you, of course, are continuing to do, not only within the outside of the park, but also within the park itself. Give you an example. I'm seeing the telephone poles being put, much bigger metal ones along Lagoon Valley Road on the south side of Lagoon Valley and within the project itself. You've got, you're substituting poles from the old wooden ones. And, you know, I'm not sure you're aware, but that's all those trees there. Those are habitats for a lot of wild birds that congregate in the lake itself and not necessarily waterfowl. Okay, so it could be terrestrial birds. Number two, just give me an example. I'm also seeing that the lake itself has been pretty much, I can't understand why it still continues to be empty. Yes, I know about the drought. Yes, I know that you've got several things going, you know, there. But it's, to me, really a shame to see that happening to our beautiful lake, to the wildlife there. You know, I'm not sure you, again, realize that you have water being pumped into the adjacent lake, maybe a trickle or so, but it's doing what it's supposed to do to attack the wildlife, both the waterfowl, the regular birds, and the wildlife that congregate. And I don't think I need to explain all the different species that are found there. And the other thing I'm concerned about is that you've got, I see people, another drenching company, maybe if with a developer working with that, you're digging a trench from the middle of the park all the way to the south side lake.
Hey, Mr. Valdez, I apologize for interrupting you, but you're right at 3 minutes there. So really appreciate your comment.
I understand that why you continue to do that. There must be a better way to do that. Manage not only the project itself, but also the park itself, so that it doesn't impact not only the wildlife, but also the people that use that park. You know, it doesn't make any rhyme or reason from my perspective.
Got it. Thank you.
And you know, I'm trying to understand that. So
thank you, sir.
You know,
I appreciate your comments, but your 3 minutes are up. I'll have staff take down your information and contact you to get you some information on the park, and so you could submit your request in writing as well. So thank you so much for your comment. In the future, the special comment period is right at the start of the meeting, so hop on early and we'll talk to you next time. Thank you, sir. Moving back to the COVID-19 update, Councilmember Silva, do you have a question?
Thank you, Chief, for the update. Is the county releasing any data on how many folks are being hospitalized or pass away of their vaccination status?
No, they are not giving that. They are not giving that information, that specific information.
Okay. maybe just a special request, if that information is available, curious to know what it is. I know there's a lot of misinformation, or maybe that's something that county public health can actually maybe more appropriately communicate out.
Yeah, we participate, the fire department participates in the weekly public health providers meeting, which is on Wednesdays, and I will have my staff ask that question tomorrow.
All right, thank you.
Councilman Roberts?
Yeah, thank you. Regarding the AB 361, is there any language that specifically refers to any type of hybrid meetings going forward outside of the state of emergency?
Thank you, Councilmember Roberts. This is Melinda Stewart. There's not any language other than in the current AB 361 that would allow for some other hybrid meeting outside of a state of emergency. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And Councilmember Silva, your hand's still up. Are you done? Okay, thanks. I made a rookie mistake. I didn't close public comment, so I'm now closing public comment on this item. Looks like council comment is done. Thank you so much, Chief, for your efforts, the information, and the report. We appreciate it. We're moving on to item 10, reports of city manager.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Mayor. I do not have any at this time.
Okay, moving on to item 11, reports of city council.
All right, try to find my hand.
Councilmember Wiley.
I will just say that several of the other council members and I attended the League of Cities conference last week on Wednesday through Friday and got a lot of good information from that and met other council members and people across the state. So that was a great opportunity to have. So that was it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Wiley. Councilmember Silva.
Thank you. Just kind of echoing Councilmember Wiley's comments. The Cal Cities conference was a great opportunity to get to meet with a lot of elected caring folks throughout the state, as well as a lot of city staff throughout the state. Just want to give a quick update and express my appreciation to the council for allowing me to be a delegate for the Cal Cities, for the League of Cal Cities. So just real quick, the body in itself, very interesting voting process. But they approved some bylaw updates, including the brand change. So rather than the league, they're referred to as Cal Cities. But I think more importantly is that they approved bylaws that incorporated the different caucuses that have been affiliated with the league. And moving forward, what I would request both the city staff and with the support of the council is if any of future council members starting from next year on want to be a member of the different caucuses that are out there, that are available and within the bylaws of the League of California Cities, if we can actually pay for their membership. Typically it's about $100. For example, I joined the Latino caucus back in January. And so it's a small minor cost, but there was some different input on what the role of those groups are, and they're really there to identify and find ways to support different issues that impact the mission and focus of those respective groups. The other thing that was approved was an effort to number one, endorse the main thing that was approved was to endorse an effort to lead into legislation that prevented the tax 1% of taxes that were generated from warehouses. So like, for example, your Amazons, to prevent that from going to the county and then the county being able to distribute it. The goal with the voice of the Cal Cities is that those taxes generated there would stay within the city that warehouse was generated from. And it was an interesting approach because a lot of, California is pretty large. Vacaville is in its own kind of blend between urban and rural. But a lot of truly rural communities, that's something that they're really concerned about, kind of losing that minimal but very important funding stream to much more larger communities. So that's a bigger struggle that I think is faced California, how to balance all that. So that was definitely interesting conversation. I was having a lot of our colleagues throughout the state. The other one was an effort to support more grant funding from the state to clean up a lot of railroadways that have a lot of blight and other issues. So again, doesn't mean like this is going to be law. This is just efforts that our membership as part of Cal Cities that this body will actually go and advocate to the state legislators to help ensure that different funds and different support come back with a focus on local control. So thank you all.
Thank you, Councilman Silva. That was a really good update. I really appreciate the comments on the caucuses. That's great. And a huge thank you for representing us at the conference, and a big thank you to all of the council members for attending the conference and learning how to do good governance and putting in that work as council members. I've got a couple quick updates and then we'll move into closed session. So really quickly, I wanted to thank City Manager Bush and City Clerk Thornburg for last night assisting me sort of impromptu with a pack of Boy Scouts. I think there were probably 15 or 16 young men that wanted to come to the council chambers to check out how we do governance and, you know, sit in our seats and do all that fun stuff and ask questions. I didn't necessarily ask the city manager or Michelle for assistance beforehand, which I apologize about, but they stuck around for about an hour, well past their stopping time. So I just really appreciate them hanging out with me and the Boy Scouts. We had a great time. So thank you for the efforts there. Quick comment. I've had a couple discussions with some staff, a couple discussions with the public, and a couple questions or discussions with even another council member about recruitment, retention, and hiring issues specifically. And so I'm sort of just making a comment to the city manager. Folks are having sort of a hard time finding job postings or really getting out there and kind of finding them kind of on modernized posting boards. Hearing a lot of feedback within the city of Vacaville, but also regionally and probably across the nation about really hard to fill positions and the need for things like incentives, retention bonuses. How do we keep good staff? How do we attract good staff in a very competitive market? I know a lot of this is sort of done in negotiations, but also I think there may be some merit to adding some additional kind of resources or emphasis to this now. I know just across the region, it's sort of a talent war. And so really just bringing a general comment back to the city manager, because I am hearing it from multiple places now, from employees, from the public, from co-council members, that it's an issue for us that's getting tough. And so just might be something to put a pin in and start kind of shining a light on and taking a look at. Last comment I'm going to make is I'm actually reading off comments for the mayor that's not here tonight. So the first comment is this is the first is a special meeting of the city council this Saturday at 9 o'clock. So again, this Saturday at 9 o'clock, we have a special meeting at the Lattice Cultural Center where the council will be conducting a study on equity, diversity, and inclusion. So that's the first update. The second update is there's a new event in the city which is being held on Saturday, October 23rd from 7 o'clock to 1 p.m. Here's the flyer right on the screen. Thank you. Good timing. It is our very first annual neighborhood cleanup day. We're very, very excited about it. We have volunteers who will help clean up yards, paint houses, make fence repairs, and other exterior improvements. If you're a property owner who lives in the planned neighborhood or a volunteer who would like to help make a difference, please register today. You can see the QR code on there. You can also see the website. We are looking in the area of Manzanita Drive and Novato Drive. I believe we'll also have a bunch of staff out there volunteering and helping with this effort. So huge thank you to staff and everybody for pulling this off. If you live in the Manzanita or Novato area, please check out this event. It should be great. And I think that closes council comments. So we are now going to move to closed session, but I'm going to open it up for public comment for closed session first. Do we have any public comment for closed session? I've got Alicia Minion. Can we open Alicia's mic, please?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. So I'm especially interested in the item regarding the Eden Oak Grove Investors LP. It looks like the parcel in South Orchard is, you're ready to negotiate the sale of that particular property. And I wanted to let you guys know that I made a public records request to Cap Solano. And the reason why I did that is because Eden Housing obtained about $1.1 million grant from Capilano. That money was provided to Capilano through a grant offered by Partnership Health Plan. And in 2017, Partnership Health Plan was offering this grant specifically to house Medi-Cal recipients, including those that are homeless or at risk for homeless. And so that means the staff and the developer knew for years, and I'm talking about Eden Housing, they knew for years that this was a condition of the grant and that it would house homeless. And so my issue is that this very important fact was omitted from the public and council until the very third community meeting, and it just was mentioned in passing. And there just needs to be a change. So if there's an affordable housing project or any project where there's something significant like that, where there's going to be supportive housing, housing first for homeless, that should be disclosed early on in the process so the public can learn what are the risks. They can make suggestions and how those risks can be mitigated. And council and planning commission, your job is to make land use decisions. And so for you to make appropriate land use decisions, you need to know how the land is being used. And so that's my comment. And I think this kind of thing, this lack of transparency and omitting such important information just creates distrust. And I think that this needs to be addressed. And I look forward to talking to you further about this. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Lori Jones, you're up.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm going to echo Alicia a little bit, but I'd like to know why the city is negotiating with Eden Housing developer for the property at South Orchard for the Oak Grove project when the project has not even been approved yet. This goes against the results from the last two council meetings on the project. If the city is in a place where they want to sell this piece of land, why is it not put out for public bid? This may not be the case, but it looks like the city housing department is railroading in this project, no matter if it's appropriate or not. The Oak Grove project planning has been less than transparent, including the fact that the Housing First supportive housing was not made public until the third public meeting and was not part of the project description or presentation, but was only mentioned as part of a comment from one of the Eden Housing representatives. If you Google Housing First, there are a lot of descriptive articles on what Housing First is, but most of the published reports indicate that Housing First model has not been proven to work. And I could not find projects where Housing First projects have been placed in the middle of residential neighborhoods. They are placed mostly in mixed urban areas, commercial and commercial industrial areas. And remember, 21 of the 55 units of the Oak Grove project, 38% would be Housing First. Remember, Housing First participants are not required to participate in services provided by the housing management for addiction or mental health issues, and Housing First cannot be used for any other types of low-income housing. If there are more units than Vacaville homeless, the apartments cannot be used for Vacaville low-income working families, but will have homeless residents imported from outside the area. Remember, Eden Housing stated that they are not interested in a project that does not include Housing First. This is because it is not lucrative without the grants, tax credits, and state and federal incentives that come with Housing First projects. Their first priority is revenue for their investors, not providing housing for low-income residents. This is not the right project for the site. Why is a large amount of institutional housing that has not been proven to be effective is not typically placed in this type of zoning being considered in the middle of a residential neighborhood? As I pointed out before, I feel it's due to the city housing department signing a contract with this developer prior to determining the appropriate location for this project. It should not matter whether the city has other available properties that fit. If it isn't right, it isn't right. Homeless supportive housing should be considered in our city housing plan, but should be carefully planned, placed appropriately, and not in the middle of a residential neighborhood. I request that you stop this negotiation on the South Orchard property with Eden Housing until the project's future is determined by the Planning Commission and the City Council.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Next caller, we have Ms. Christine Galone.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you very much, Council. I would like to reiterate some of what has already been shared this evening. And number one, why is the city involved in negotiating to purchase property when, again, the project has not been approved? Secondly, I have asked on more than one occasion to address the parking situation, the number of parking spaces allocated, how many of those are already designated as parking for staff, for handicap, for charging stations, how many are actually left for residents. Secondly, the route for children going to Alamo, Hemlock, Jepson, and Vaca High goes right down Orchard and Monte Vista. Children deserve a safe corridor to pass to and from school, and the number of residents in the Housing First apartments and in this project, I think, pose really a concern for parents and for children. And again, Housing First has really not led to productive, independent living. It only has put a roof over the heads of its residents. They are not required to accept any services to address the reasons for their homelessness. So again, I would like to request that this project be removed from the area of Orchard and Monte Vista, and it may not be appropriate for many areas of Vacaville. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Gillum. Last commenter, we have Mr. Russ Fisher.
Good evening, Council and Vice Mayor. Thank you for the opportunity to address you. I just wanted to just make a comment very much along the lines of the previous commenters. When I read the agenda, I was very concerned when I saw that this closed session had just very blatantly listed, under negotiation pricing in terms of payment. And through that, I would assume or draw a conclusion that this is already a foregone process that this property is going to be sold. And based on, our participation in the ongoing discussions with the Oak Grove project, it was my understanding, and Nolan, maybe you can even comment on this, that this was going to be looked at and for other locations, and they were going to bring this back to council and continue discussions. So why would you need a closed session to talk about payment for property? I mean, it sounds like this is being, there's a hidden agenda here, and this is less than transparent. And that's very disappointing because even in the council sessions that we attended, it was noted by multiple council members that there was a lack of transparency on this whole process. And that one of the things that you all wanted to bring to the future discussions around these types of projects was transparency with the public. And the lack of getting out in front of this with the public, this just doesn't seem like that's the right direction to honor that goal. And I'm just kind of bewildered as to why you would go into a closed session to discuss, purchasing this property. And I have a growing concern with Ms. Cantu as well with her actions and how this has been driven from her side. It just seems like all this is about public service and being what's good for the city and the public as a whole, and it seems collusive almost with developers. And I don't see Ms. Cantu's actions being represented for us on our side of the table, or at least being in consideration. And I have a growing concern with that, and with the direction the council is taking on this. And I really would, beyond comment, I would hope that you could respond after we're done with this, after I'm done with this comment, as to why is this happening in closed session? And I'll give it back to you, Noel.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. I appreciate it. So City Manager, this literally is my first rodeo. Do we have the ability to comment back to questions or respond at all? Or maybe this is a city attorney question. I've never been in this situation, so I'm not sure what we do or not. Do we have the ability to have staff respond?
Turn it over to the city attorney.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. You really cannot comment on items that are going into closed session. What I can share with you and with the public is this item is not on closed session for any kind of final decision. It's really to give the direction to staff on negotiation items that are set forth in the agenda, price in terms of payment. But no final decision will be part of the discussion tonight.
Thank you, City Attorney. I appreciate it. I mean, just a quick comment. I mean, I do think that we, with the amount of interest in this project and the amount of calls, comments, emails, et cetera, we did sort of miss an opportunity to maybe, I think we could have seen this coming and that people would be concerned about this item. So maybe just in the future, we probably should have had some sort of informational item maybe before the closed session, but I appreciate that. So thank you everyone for your comments. I'm going to close the open comment on the closed session item. We will convene the public session of the meeting and open the closed session portion of the meeting. Melinda or Michelle, will we be reporting out anything tonight?
No, there will be nothing to report out tonight.
Okay, so we will not be reporting out tonight. We will take a 6-minute break between open and closed session for council members. So thank you and good night, Vacaville.